being haunted.
And here we go again.
Here we are.
Mr. Cooper. How are you, sir?
Hey, guys.
Delightful to see you.
Yes, well, we've seen each other, Dan.
We have, but it's nice to see you again. Like, it's been a couple years now, so.
Look at all these people with gray hair, except Marcus.
I know. See, that's how you stay young.
No.
Shave it all off.
He looks good. And the masked vigilante there.
Yeah, I was like, what is that?
Oh,
You're muted, Howard.
Thank God.
All right. You guys ready for this?
We are, Greg. I'm trying.
You're ready? I had to run to the car. I forgot my
I'm gonna have one of those on the second round.
Between that and all the Reese's Pieces for Halloween, so that'll be good.
You got to go get the Thanksgiving dinner candy corn.
I don't know if I can do that. It's bad enough I have a Kentucky Fried Chicken log, so I can only go down so far a rabbit hole of pop culture tastes.
Well, I'm taking one for the team, and I'm going to try the Thanksgiving dinner. Apparently, each piece of candy corn tastes like a different part of Thanksgiving dinner. So,
oh dear God.
yeah.
Yeah, that sounds delicious. Candy that tastes like meat.
Make sure you can hear me on
Where'd you
YouTube.
go wrong?
Stephen, can you hear me okay? Or should I be using headphones, or am I good?
Do you have headphones? If you have headphones, let's try those just because there is an echo.
Better.
Okay.
Right?
Let me,
Do I sound okay, Steve, or do you want me to
I was
mic?
gonna say let's do a sound test. So Dan, you start.
I am starting. Hello, hello.
Perfect. I think that's good. Howard?
Howard is frozen.
Howard's frozen.
Zoom is like, I'm telling you, at school today, it was all everywhere. So I'm hoping it'll.
Is Howard frozen, or is he having like an episode or something?
Stop! Don't say that.
Don't say. I think he's frozen.
Oh my God, that's hilarious.
Or he's taking my advice in being Mark Grunwald.
Oh, that's so awful. All right, Marcus, you try it. Let's hear you.
Test 1, 2. Can you hear me? Is there an echo?
Something's different. You shaved.
Yeah. Well, I teach and I have to wear a mask all day, and I found a mustache and a beard was just too much with the mask.
I feel you. Same here.
All day.
I'm getting the mask lines now. Hey, oh, there he is. Howard, how about you? You still in?
You're still muted.
He's either muted or
He's
messing with us.
He's lecturing us now.
He's
I know. Let's keep it muted.
You have control, right, Steve?
Yeah, but just,
I know.
You can shut it down.
Yeah.
Howard, you are muted though.
There you go.
There you go.
Yeah, sorry about that.
All right, and then Christian, let's try you now.
okay, testing, 1, 2, 3.
Much better. Greg, how about you?
You can always hear me.
Always. Hey, I think I actually. Oh no, it's a little different, right? Than your background. Or maybe it's the same. It's just
No,
reversed.
it's the same image.
It's the same image, right? It's
Wow.
reversed. Yeah. Old Navy. I was like, wait, what? All right.
You can't see the two candles on top of the skulls that I have behind me, can you?
Well, you can see them, but
Oh,
they just
yeah,
look like
okay,
big
now I
glowing
see it.
blobs.
Now I know what it is.
Yeah, I may just blow them out instead of running the risk of setting my house on fire.
Yeah.
But it's
Yeah.
well
Oh, yeah.
worth it, for the effect.
Right. Hey, we'll make headlines. Like I mean, just not having you guys isn't enough apparently. So like,
I'll take one for the team.
That's right. Okay.
Wow, Marcus, with like puzzle boxes and everything. I feel like
Yeah.
How long has it been since we've all seen each other?
1 second.
Well, Chris and I were in like related companies for a couple of years, so I saw him.
Doing really fascinating work.
Yes, fascinating work. Maybe 4 years ago, 3-4 years ago, and then Greg and I see each other. But I think the last time was probably the reunion thing, Howard, right?
Oh yeah, that's right. Well, I saw Greg and Chris about a year ago. It was New York Comic Con.
Oh, okay.
And Marcus, I missed.
Yeah, well, because I kept trying to find you. I could have sworn I saw you there though, but I guess I missed you.
No, you saw Deb. You just said you were Mark,
That's right.
and she had no idea who you were. And she said, Mark, I don't know, could it have been Wade? And she'd heard me say his name, and I said, no, I don't think Mark Wade would come looking for me. And it took me, I think, until we were driving home on the Mass Pike that I realized who it was. And
she did a good job of disguising the fact that she didn't know who I was.
Right. And she said, well, did I know him? I said, yeah, when he was, you were a college intern, right?
Yeah.
So she would have met you back in those days.
Yeah.
And you've changed a little bit.
A little bit.
You had hair then.
And nice hair, I might
I have
add.
hair a little bit.
Yeah. The only one that hasn't really changed is Chris, which pisses. Well, no, Greg is looking pretty much the same. Dan, you look exactly the same as well. I always thought.
Thanks. I was waiting for that. Now I can continue on. Yeah, I feel that you could go well now.
All right, guys. So we finally have viewers. I'm getting my partner's in the bedroom manning the comments to make sure we're all okay. So, all right. Welcome to my panel of guests and to our viewers. My name's Steve Wolver. I'm an artist and educator in Boston. I've been collecting comic books for well over 30 years. To briefly recap last August, I had the pleasure of having an extensive conversation on Marvel Comics in the 90s with Greg Wright, Dan Chichester, and Marcus McLaurin. We had so much fun and such a positive response, we decided to do it again, and with more friends. I'm apologizing to everyone if I screw up names or references. Don't beat me up. I had a long week of grad school and teaching. It's Friday night and my facilities are slowly failing me. I'll be trying to stick to my prepared notes as I'm reading now, but our discussion will likely take a life on its own. Let's begin. So I'm going to introduce my panel of guests. I'm going in alphabetical order just to make it easier. Christian Cooper, welcome. Hailing from New York City, Christian Cooper is a former writer and editor of Marvel Comics. Mr. Cooper has worked on Midnight Suns related titles, including Darkhold, as well as Excalibur and Star Trek Starfleet Academy. Chris has a long history of LGBT activism and is one of Marvel's first openly gay writer editors. Christian returned to comics recently with DC's publication of It's a Bird, a Black Lives Matter comic book based on his experiences. Welcome, Chris.
Hey, guys.
Chris, I just read it last night and it's super powerful. Great. It's a Bird is really powerful. Well done. Really beautiful stuff.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Dan, D.G. Chichester, Connecticut native.
Yep.
Chichester, thank you. I'll get there. He began working as an assistant to then Marvel comic editor-in-chief Jim Shooter. Dan would go on to become an editor of Marvel's imprint Epic Comics and pen prolific runs on Nick Fury, Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. and Daredevil. Among other accomplishments, Chichester co-created Terra Incorporated. We're glad to have you back, Dan.
Great to be here.
All right. Howard Mackie, a native of Brooklyn, New York, Howard started at Marvel as an assistant editor in the early 80s. He would eventually oversee Marvel's new universe. Mr. Mackie may be most well known for co-creating the 90s Ghost Rider, of which we'll be spending some time this evening to focus upon. While helping to steer the Midnight Suns in various directions, Howard was also a key Spider-Man writer from 1992 to 2001. Thanks for joining us, Howard.
Thanks for having me, Chris. Chris. Thanks.
It will be Chris too. You know what? That's good. Good. I'm honored. Thank you. Marcus McLaurin.
How much has Howard had to drink?
I know, right? We just started.
Not enough.
Marcus McLaurin. Marcus McLaurin has been an editor, writer, penciler, and a colorist for Marvel Comics. Besides helping to launch the award-winning Marvel's miniseries, Mark may be possibly best known as the writer of the 90s Luke Cage series, Cage, that revitalized the hero for a new generation. A bigger claim to fame is that Mark is the first creator of color to write Black superheroes Cloak, Blade, and Luke Cage. I'm happy you're back for round 2, Mark.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Good to meet you.
Gregory Wright, besides being a well-known colorist for a bazillion titles of both DC and Marvel Comics and an editor, Gregory Wright wrote Silver Sable and the Wild Pack, Daredevil, Morbius, and co-wrote Deathlock with Dwayne McDuffie. Good evening, Greg.
Glad to be back.
Evening.
All right, guys.
As many expletives as I can.
There you go. All right. We're going to jump right in, guys. So I'm going to share my screen and we'll get started. All right.
God, that's all of us.
It's all of you.
I love that picture.
Oh, that's a
Memories,
good
huh,
picture.
guys? Yeah, memories. I thought that was a really good way to start the evening off.
That's not me. That's Len, by the way.
Yes.
That's right. I was going to say.
Len did threaten to show, so we got to see. Keep your.
He
Keep
might
your
be
eye
coming,
on the
I have
comments.
a statement. He might be coming in. I've got my phone ready in case he texts me. But I have a statement he sent me if he can't make it. So we'll at least get something from him.
A prepared statement. Good.
A prepared. Oh yeah, it was very official. I was like, okay.
Does anybody remember where we shot that? Was it up on the roof at Marvel?
Central Park. We went up. We were.
No, no, really?
Yeah, we walked around the park, and it was somewhere in Central Park.
Okay.
The whole location. There's another set that was under like a bridge, but that was the one.
Wow, I have no memory of this at all. And that's going to be a recurring statement for me. And for some reason,
Yeah, me too. No, me too.
Yeah, I can't see Dan at this point. Oh, wait a minute. Maybe-
Dinner, is that you in the middle, Dan?
Yeah, very, very, very hirsute. Yeah.
And then Chris, what's the book you're holding? Just like a portfolio, or?
I have no freaking clue.
Okay. Okay.
Darkhold. Come on.
Oh, come on. It was a birding guide. We know that.
All right.
And Dan, there was a time when people, and I believe, if I recall, people used to confuse you and I when we both had our beards and our mullets. Didn't somebody from Marvel get on the elevator at one point and start talking to you as though you were me?
Was it Carol Kalish?
Yes.
And I think she did to both of us. She talked to me like I was you, and she talked to you like I was you were me. Yeah.
Yeah, and whenever she thought I was you, I just cursed her out.
And
That was okay.
plays a lot.
Yeah.
Okay, Howard, you co-created Danny Ketch, the new Ghost Rider, with Javier Saltares. Did I say that right? Saltares?
Yes. Yep.
Terrific. Where did you pull inspiration for Danny Ketch?
Well, I mean, basically, Danny Ketch was me with a better name. I hated growing up in Brooklyn with the name Howard, just to clarify. So I would have preferred Dan, Mr. Chichester. And that's where all of the inspiration for Danny Ketch came from. Because when I was asked to submit a pitch for a new Ghost Rider comic, and it was because Mark Grunwald was executive editor at that point, and he and I had worked together for a number of years with me as his assistant. He knew I loved the character. And so they were looking to bring the character back and asked me to turn in a pitch. What I didn't realize at the time was they had also asked about 6 or 7 other people, most of whom were far bigger, well-established names in the industry than myself. And had I known that, I would have completely frozen and not written it. And the only caveat I was given was I couldn't use Johnny Blaze. Had to create an entire new character from the ground up, which kind of irritated me because I wanted to do Blaze. And so I modeled, I probably took the old writer's maxim, write what you know, a little bit too far. And there's a lot of me in Dan Ketch. I grew up in that neighborhood. Cypress Hills is where I grew up. I went back to
the cemetery too, right? You used
I went back to the cemetery to take photographs as reference for Javier. And so that's everything there. I was drawing inspiration from Brooklyn.
Okay, so I had to print out my notes because I'm screwing up tonight already. But so Howard, you kind of made me question. So Marcus, you use Chicago for Luke Cage. Dan, you've had Hell's Kitchen for Daredevil. Greg, you and Dwayne used Coney Island for Deathlock. Some of the stories in Darkhold for Chris, Nick Fury's Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D., you guys bounced with Dan and Greg. You guys bounced all over the world. My question is, and for Howard as well, how important is the location for a story or for a series? Story, and second question, how important is it for a series?
Well, I personally think location is key. And even when I was writing Spider-Man, I always felt like the biggest supporting cast member was New York City.
Great.
And so for me, again, going back to Ghost Rider, it was all about the cemetery in Brooklyn.
Mm-hmm.
Throw it out.
I think it depends on the series. I mean, it depends on the story.
Yeah.
For example, with Darkhold, because it was moving, pages were popping up all over the world, you had to move the story around. And also, I like to travel. So, I had been to Maui, so I set a story in Maui. I'd been to, New Hope, Pennsylvania. I'm like, oh, this is a quaint little town. This is where they can be based, So it's sort of, as Howard said, you write what you know.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I think with some stories, place is very integral to the story. As Howard said, imagine Spider-Man without Queens. It just doesn't work. Whereas Captain America, even though it's from Brooklyn, Brooklyn doesn't factor into Captain America the way Queens factors into Spider-Man. So
Right. I think there's also an element of needing to get out of New York a lot, because if every superhero is in New York, then you have a hard time not running into them all the time. So if you want to have a character that had his own adventures or her own adventures, you need to put them somewhere away from the main center of activity in New York.
And you're also saying, why aren't the Avengers doing it? Right?
Right. Well, yeah, I remember when I was assistant editor on the Avengers and then went on to be the editor, I used to say to Mark Grunwald, with the number of times that the Avengers mansion was attacked, that the best thing the Avengers could do to protect New York City was get the hell out of town, because more damage was done, including in the movies, because of the Avengers being there.
Very selfish people. Ultimately.
Yes, they were. Yes.
I just wanted to set Deathlock someplace cool that I liked. I used to spend a lot of time at Coney Island, and I liked the movie The Warriors, and I thought that would be a cool backdrop, occasionally, because it's like it is. How many scenes of the New York City can you stand to see drawn, with artists who sometimes will draw cereal box buildings? So finding anything different for your book, so when people open it up, oh, that's different. It's not, the same, shot of Spider-Man swinging down, the cereal box lane. I think that's kind of an important part for me.
Do you feel like Greg, Coney Island kind of fit some of the more oddball stories, and we're going to get to one of those of Deathlock, right? It's
that was. I wish I could say, yeah, we did that way, but no, we just kind of chose it because it was different, and I used to spend a lot of time there. Because I also, when I was originally editing Darkhawk, I suggested that they set that at the beginning at Coney Island.
So you just like Coney Island?
I go to Coney Island, yeah.
He did end up in Coney Island for something, though, like a story or something, I think, right? Maybe.
Yeah, but when that's their location, stuff does happen. We had a whole scene in second issue of Deathlock where I basically had him being attacked on top of the cyclone, so that I could force Butch Geist to draw a roller coaster being destroyed panel after panel after panel. Because I saw Frank Miller do it in an issue of Daredevil, and it looked really awesome. So I thought, I know, let me do that to the artist. He cursed me out for that one.
But he did such a great job.
For me with Ghost Rider, as much as it all started in the cemetery, the inspiration, I really liked having Ghost Rider in an urban setting, especially in New York City, because of the contrast. My approach to, especially my early run of the series, even before we got to the Midnight Suns, was to have him occupying a dark corner of the Marvel universe.
Ooh,
So, my least favorite Ghost Rider stories was Ghost Rider in Hell, because there's nothing different about that. That's, like having Ant-Man fight
Right.
a bunch of people that are the same size as him,
Yep.
microscopic people. It just, it is the contrast. So to have a flaming skull running down Fifth Avenue or through Central Park or in the streets of Brooklyn, that was the appeal to the setting for me.
Did you have so did you put the cemetery in the story? Like you already do you remember any of your pitch to the story?
Oh yeah, no. The origin all takes place in the cemetery, and the cemeteries that I did grow up in. That's not I'm not exaggerating. The apartment that I spent most of my life in faced the cemetery. In order for us to get to the best sledding hills, we had to walk through the cemetery or sneak through this cemetery in order to get to baseball fields. And when I say sneak through, you sometimes had sprint because they didn't like us cutting through. And one of the caretakers of the cemetery, he had a German Shepherd that if he saw kids, he would set the German Shepherd on you. And he also had a shotgun filled with rock salt.
Your kids though, right? Your kids.
Yes. Oh yeah. I was, that was before we went into the cemetery to drink too much and
right.
other things. And he would shoot, and it couldn't, it hurt, but it couldn't do damage to you if you got shot. I never got shot and I never got bitten. But the rock salt would sting based upon some of my friends' personal experiences. And the funny thing is, with time, you start thinking, well, am I just making that up because it's a cool story? And then 2 years ago, I was at a convention in New Jersey, and people come up to me, and especially when I do them closer to New York City, I have a good ear for accents. And so I tell this guy was from Brooklyn originally. And, I confirmed it, and he said, yes, he was born there and then moved to Long Island, but I used to go back. And as a matter of fact, I used to go to the cemetery that the Ghost Rider is in. And we started going back and forth, and the rock salt shotgun came up, and he spun around to his wife, he said, see, I told you that was true. So yeah, yeah.
Little known fact is that is how Howard kept all of his freelancers in line. As an editor, he had a shotgun with rock salt in his office. So
yeah, it was a different day, Dan, a different day.
So when you did the proposal, the book comes out 1990. So what do you think? The proposal was probably you offered your proposal, you gave your proposal at like 89. Do you think it was earlier than that?
Yes, it would have been 89 because it was before my daughter was born, and she is 31, and I'm going to be a granddad in about a month and a half for the first time.
Congratulations.
Yes.
Wonderful.
And but it wasn't as simple as just turning in the proposal and it getting.
I'm sure.
Except, yeah, Chris, I can't remember. Were you the original assistant on Ghost Rider?
No, I came on after Javier when, oh my God, I'm blanking on names. Help me out here, Howard. After Javier, who penciled the book?
Mark Texeira.
I came on after Mark Texeira had already taken over.
Okay. Yeah, so that was relatively early on. I think that was issue 6 or 7. So anyway, what happened, and I'll make this as quickly as possible because I don't want to, there's a lot of us. But I was asked to do the proposal. And as I said, I was unaware that there were other people and like sincerely talented writers who were also pitching, but for whatever reason, they being Mark Grunwald and Tom DeFalco were more drawn to mine. And so
you had only been an editor, right? You had
I had done some writing, but no regular writing. I was mostly I had done at that point. I think my first job, which was Iron Man number 211, The Return of the Living Laser, was in about end of '97, I think, and then I had Chuck Norris and his Karate Commandos, and I was doing a bunch of Hawkeye stories for Solo Avengers or Avengers Scotland, and so that was my total writing experience, and they did the new project memo and pushed it to our friends in the sales department, who decided that an unknown writer with unknown artists at the time, because Javier and Mark had no rep at that point, and it was a failed character. That's what people have to remember, is that the first series was canceled because of poor sales. Now, I happened to be one of the few people that was reading it at the time, and loved it, but we had a lot of resistance from the sales department. So they originally pitched it we were doing it as an ongoing series. They decided, no, it will never do that. Let's do it as a limited series only. So, and my fellow writers can attest to this. Every time you make a change to that kind of format, you have to change the proposal somewhat, because the pacing of what you're trying to do is vastly different. So we were going to do it as a limited series. Then they decided, no, let's do it as a one-shot graphic novel. Again, I had to go back to the drawing board and retool it. Then they decided, because Frank's Dark Knight Returns had hit big. No, we're going to do it as a Dark Knight format. Again, now a limited series broken up, but that format. And I'm trying to then they really just wanted to just torpedo it. And DeFalco, he and I spoken about this. He finally just got really pissed and essentially said, "Screw it. The thing of it is, we're going to do it, and we're going to do it the way I want to." And so he greenlit it, and I believe the head of the sales department wrote an impassioned memo to the publisher, Mike Hobson, explaining exactly why this was going to be a money loser, and it was a mistake to do. And Tom, this is the part, I didn't know that part. And I also didn't know this following thing. When the sales came out on the first issue, the head of the sales department came into Tom's office with her memo in hand and put it on his desk and said, "I was wrong."
Wow.
So
that's huge.
And it took off, but nobody thought it was good. I mean, I was as surprised as anybody else that at the degree of success of how it took off, because I mean, it was a fun project for me.
When did you realize how big it was? When did you realize, oh my God, we have a hit on our hands?
Well, unlike my good friend Gregory, I'm going to try to be politic and not use names, but
that's not going to last long, Howard. So.
I give him a half hour.
Yeah. I'm not drinking, so I'll be fine. I was in Bobby's office when that cover when it first came in, and in that the mock-up of the cover, yeah. And Bobby was holding it up to show me, say, "Look, this looks really cool, right?" And a very popular, very well-known writer was walking by the door. I was standing in the doorway, or just inside the doorway, and he came walking by and just said, They're bringing that character back.
That's an X Factor comment, Howard. Sorry.
And then just in a huff continued down the office. And when he was writing a relatively very high selling comic for Marvel, and the first issue of Ghost Rider outsold his high-selling comic, and I think that's when we knew that there might have been something there.
I think the fact that what you said before that you were having fun with it, to me, is like what made that original run, to me at least, just as a reader, like so marvelous. Like you were just having fun.
Well, yeah, that's the point, is that nobody expected it to have such success. So I was kind of left alone for the first bunch of issues, close, or at least for my first year's plan. And what I was really in my head, and I am not comparing myself at all to Stan, but I looked at what he had done with the first year's run of Spider-Man, in which every issue introduced a new character, a new villain to go against. And so that was my attempt at doing that. I wanted to populate the Ghost Rider Rogues Gallery. And so that's where all of those characters came from. And it was, and I'm sure we'll get into this, but then shortly thereafter, when everybody realized how popular it was, and as was typical in those days, because in those days and possibly now, because of the way sales were placed, issue number 1 sold really, really well, but then the pre-orders on 2 and 3 went down because they were ordering them well before issue 1 came out. And then then there were second printings of those, maybe even third printings. It was back in the ridiculous day where they would do another printing and like change the background. It was like a bronze cover and a gold cover. I mean, it was completely ridiculous as far as I'm concerned. But then by issue 4 was when the sales rose precipitously and then continued to go up.
Howard, you segued into a great point that I wanted. So, okay, let's talk about the initial supervillains that you created for the new series: Deathwatch, Zodiac, Blackout, Snowblind, Hag Control. Where did your ideas come from, these characters?
Well, I mean, from my twisted imagination is the simple answer, but it was also an attempt, as I said, I wanted Ghost Rider to inhabit the dark corner of the Marvel universe. So if you look at that list, they're not necessarily demonic creatures. Some of them, Deathwatch was a mutant, and some of them just had superpowers. I really, really was making an effort to not just have him go up against Zarathos and Mephisto and all that. I tried to look around the Marvel universe and either sometimes you just model characters after other characters, but in some cases I also I think that first year I brought Nightmare in, who, well, I believe that there you go. That is from a Nightmare issue. Because I also had fun getting into the hell that exists within each of our minds, our personal hells. Oh man, that sounded so much more profound than I am.
Beautiful. That was, yeah.
So, but it was an effort to get him incorporated into that particular corner of the Marvel universe instead of having it just as a complete and total adjunct to.
But the thing was, as I colored this, the thing that struck me was you were creating a new this different corner of the Marvel universe that didn't exist, and I think a lot of it was because you had taken a lot of your own personal experiences, and it actually felt like you weren't making up Cypress Hills. You weren't making up these neighborhoods. You weren't making up these people. I mean, it was such a surprise because they're like, oh, it's going to be Ghost Rider and he's going to have fire and he's going to haha. But there was all this actual depth, right off the bat. It wasn't just like the typical, okay, he shows up and he kills a bunch of people and it's all cool and oh, Javier made this cool bike. No, there was all this actual story, and I think because you pulled so much from your childhood into it. Because I can remember asking you about stuff, and you had said at one point, you thought of the things that scared you the most, and I can remember you were talking about how any harm that might possibly come to your daughters.
Yes.
And, that was how you sometimes thought of a threat, is how would people feel? And I always, because when you color a book, you spend a lot more time on reading it and on the pages than the average reader. So I would get to think about all this stuff. And I really felt that it just did that, you know, in a way that hadn't been done on other books. And I think that's really why it succeeded, because I think people actually read it and went, hey, this is more than just a guy with a flaming skull and a cool bike, very quickly.
Well, thank you, Greg.
Well, I was just going to say, and Howard, I think a lot of the success of the book was because of its attitude. You know, the attitude you brought to the writing, which I think Greg just talked about, the depth, and just sort of it had an edge because it felt real. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it was one of the first books, I think, to have the black borders instead of white borders.
Yeah.
Again, correct me if I'm wrong, did you introduce the penance stare? Was that not part of the original Ghost Rider?
No, that was me.
Yeah. So, you know, all of that, so that added a grittiness, an attitude that I think people really responded to.
Wow. Okay, Dan, you're gonna have to like slap me down because right now, Greg is.
I was just wondering, could you give us the penance stare right now? Just lay that on us.
No, I'm out of practice, and you know, and there's not I'm old, and there's not a pill for that.
That's why he's got the candles in the background.
Yes.
Greg, you were talking about the coloring of the book. So you started with a basic, really muted palette. I mean, there were lots of reds, yellows. But do you remember, was it a conscious decision? Was that an editorial mandate? How did you, eventually you did add more color to the book, but you were on the book for a really long time, but it evolved. Do you remember?
I decided, you know, I mean, Ghost Rider was actually one of the first books that was mine to color from the very beginning. And I wound up on the book, you know, I was wandering down the hall one day and Howard and Bobby were in the hallway looking at this cool artwork and they said, hey, come look at this, you know, and it was, you know, just page after page of Javier and Mark's work. I'm like, this is so awesome. And Howard said, you really like it? And I went, yeah. He goes, do you want to color it? You know, Bobby's like,
yeah, that's always my decision to make.
And I went, yeah, that'd be awesome. You know, and I kind of took a cinematic approach because, you know, when I was working at Epic, the color was very different. And at Marvel, they just colored everything, you know, the regular characters got their regular color, and then you found some background that didn't clash. But over at Epic, they were telling a story with the color. And they were using light. You know, I remember Jim Sherman in particular, you know, was in one day and he was just talking about how he changed the color of every scene on all of the characters because of the light that was in the room. And I thought this is a great opportunity to do that because Ghost Rider is a light source. So I pretty much used him as a light source as much as possible. So the book, you know, winds up being very blue and very yellow in a lot of ways, but it kind of depended on the art. You know, the color changed a bit when Mark Texiera started drawing the book himself because he was a little simpler with bigger forms and a lot more black, whereas Javier was a lot more detailed. But it was really about, you know, the color has to suit the story, it has to suit the artwork, and it has to suit the actual character. And, you know, when you got a guy with a flaming skull and giant flaming tires, that's going to kind of be where it goes from there.
Guys, as editors and writers, are there ever times you put notes in like, I want this yellow, I really want this blue? Or do you just kind of let the colors do their thing?
For me, it was always about, you know, my philosophy as an editor was to make my job as simple as possible, and the best thing I could do was to hire the right people and people that I trusted. And you know, what the biggest compliment that I can give to Greg as a colorist is the organic nature of his coloring that just pulled everything together. You know, so that, I mean, I'm not going to criticize modern coloring but
I will.
Yeah,
I totally will.
Also, you have to keep in mind what Greg was working with at the time in terms of printing and, you know, I mean, the fact that he was able to give us what we got and to really, as I said, I mean, it felt organic to me. He was working with what was there on the page.
I agree.
And so enhancing it, but enhancing it not to make us say, oh, look at how great this coloring is. No, it's great coloring because it's working with the art.
Agreed, 100%. I've begun collecting original art. I had started years ago, but now I'm really getting into it. Greg, I just got a Silver Sable page. I can't wait to show you. And I have a couple of Luke Cage pages coming, and but I love the black and white art. Having an art background myself, I can't. But then also comparing it to the colored pages, it's just, and having reread this, I read all these series again, having not read them since I was a kid. Blown away. And really, Greg, you were one of the linchpins of the series besides Howard.
Ding, 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 ding.
Ding, ding, ding. Drink, you know.
Yeah.
That's official now. The linchpin of Marvel Comics.
Maybe I really am. I don't know.
That could not have been more planned.
He has no idea.
I have no idea. I'm like, all right, I'll drink it.
But you know what? I want to piggyback off of what Howard said. If you know, I mean, I was probably the pickiest person about color, you know, with the people that I was working. If I have to give you notes, there's no reason for me to have you on the book.
Right.
Exactly.
You know, I did exactly what Howard did. I tried to hire people that were going to do cool stuff. And the greatest thing is when, you know, if you had to talk to a writer or an artist or somebody about what they were doing and have them send back something based on what you said, that was a million times better than the stupid idea that you gave him off the top of your head. And that's the way it's supposed to work. You know, if it just comes back the way I'm doing it, why do I have you on the book?
Right.
And I would just add, as a writer, the only thing I would say is that the only time I put any sort of color instruction in is if it is essential to the telling of the story.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Well, that
otherwise,
was important because I always asked for the plots of everything I colored, because a lot of times the writer had this cool idea for something and it's not being pulled off by the art yet. You know, so you know.
Oh yeah, and a lot of times you're getting the
it's a dark, spooky scene, and the artist either is incapable or just didn't draw it that way. So what I would do then is I would wrench it back with the color to make it spooky, and I would have writers calling me, going, "Oh my God, you saved the book!" I'm like, "Well, I didn't save the book. It's just that the artist didn't make it look like that in black and white. I just basically added a lot of blue and purple to make it dark, but somebody else could have, you know, just colored it regular." And that would happen, you know, with certain colorists I won't name, where, you know, they would just kind of ignore the story, and you'd have this scene that's definitely supposed to be at night, and there it is, bright and sunny daylight. And, you know, then that's when you'd have to have some, you know, color corrections. And that was frustrating. So, but it was important to have the plot because.
Well, but not only the plot, Greg, back in the old days, you were coloring
pages.
for the most part with
exactly.
With the words on the page.
Yeah.
Well, sometimes I didn't even have the words. Yeah. Sometimes I was coloring off of faxes of breakdowns of pencils.
Well, there's that. Yeah.
Mark, I cut you off. What were you going to say?
Oh, just what Howard was saying, that you often are coloring that he was offering colorists are often working on pages that have no lettering on them. They're inked, or as he said, they're sometimes penciled, very seldom penciled, because that's just a bad editor.
So it would go from a penciler to the inker to the colorist and then the letterer?
No, ideally not.
Parallel. Yeah, sometimes.
Okay. Greg, we're going to do a colorist panel. We have to. And letterer. I need to do a letterist panel.
One point, I think a couple of times we've talked about Bobby. Have we mentioned that Bobby is Bobby Chase, who was the editor on?
Yes, thank you.
So she was the editor, and Bobby is a she, not a he.
Yes.
Bobby was the editor, right, Chris? Wasn't Bobby on you Bobby's assistant?
Yes, I was Bobby's assistant. Yeah. Yep.
Guys, let's go back to, so like, not only did Howard create a ton of characters, every single one of you, all 5 of you, have created your own unique. You would either. Okay, so I'm gonna go back to my notes though. To all of you, you find new. Do you find creating new characters exciting or more tedious? You all use forgotten characters and dusted them off, created brand new characters. You also stuck close to traditional Marvel continuity, but found ways to explore or exploit new avenues of different characters. Do you prefer coming up with your own characters, or do you prefer coming up with past continuity? Like Marcus, you used Dakota North and Cage. I thought that was pretty inspired.
I love Dakota North. Yeah,
I love her too.
When you have characters that you love and that sort of die, and it's like, wow, I really, you know, I would love to play with that character is one thing. And the other thing, I think, sort of all of us have a connection to Mark Grunwald. Mark Grunwald was the continuity guru. And and he was, you know, he if you couldn't be around him without him his influence sort of letting you know about every character and how they influenced every other one. And there was never a reason to create a new character if there was a character that existed that did that thing, but there was always a reason to create a new character that did something new and different.
But Mark could always tell you, if you were trying to think up a character, if you went to Mark, he would know immediately if there was another character that was already doing that and could tell you the history of it. And you might say, oh, maybe I'll just use that character instead. And because he was generally the guy that got to say, yes, you can use this character or you can have it, that was very handy for those of us that knew Mark very well. So he could kind of get us permission for a character that maybe.
Right. But Greg, you and Marcus and I had the distinct advantage of working with Mark, and especially through a vast majority of the official handbook of the Marvel Universe. So
I have the originals.
So do I.
Okay.
As do I.
Yes. But we did. I mean, Mark was, you know, both Greg and Marcus are correct. I mean, Mark was a huge influence on me. I mean, look, I would not be writing if it wasn't for Mark. He made me write my first story. He gave me no choice, which was the Iron Man story. I did not want to do it. I wanted to write. I just didn't want anybody to ever read anything I wrote. And you know, Mark literally gave me no choice. And I did. And then from that point on, I was getting offers. And then even when I was doing all of those Hawkeye stories for the Avengers Spotlight or Solo Avengers, Mark would, you know, occasionally come in to me and just say, yeah, why don't you use, you know, Texas Twister? And I said, really? And, you know, and then, you know, and then I got to use the Orb in a story, and the Orb was an old Ghost Rider villain. And so I think that's when Mark realized, you know, the affinity I had, because I responded to the Orb in a way that, oddly enough, I didn't respond to Texas Twister and Shooting Star. Was that her name?
Yep.
You know, but Mark was a huge influence.
Chris, you and Dan both had books that were like entrenched in continuity. Is that daunting, or you're totally in love with it?
I loved it. In fact, it was, when I came up with the idea for a Darkhold series, it was because I was thinking, oh, you know, Marvel doesn't really have a horror book, a pure horror book. And I thought, well, what might that look like? And I started digging into the continuity, and I came across one line in the description of the Darkhold that said the book had been scattered in medieval times, but then most of the pages had been recollected. And I'm
ding,
like,
ding, ding.
Most. Ding, 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 ding. And I was like, yeah. And then I just ran with it. And that just opened up a whole world, because, you know, Modred is completely tied to the Darkhold. Mm-hmm. And the idea of playing with Modred was just a gift. I mean, it's the way Howard responded to the Orb. You know, I just, first of all, just the visual of the character with the white hair, but more importantly, his backstory, his origin. He's evil, but he's evil because he's good. And that conflict, I really tried to play with that a lot in Darkhold. There was one issue in particular where I went straight to that conflict.
Wait, we're gonna get there. I've got a slide. Hold up one second. Don't spoil it yet. I'm ready. I've got it. It's because I loved that story. Like I loved it so much.
Thank you.
Dan,
that story. Well, we'll get to that one. But anyway,
because Christian, but you know, when I told people I was doing this all across the internet, people wrote about issue 12 that we're talking about right now.
Oh, yay!
Like, so we'll get there. We're gonna gush. I'm gonna get there. I promise. Dan, were you a fan of Tomb of Dracula? Because yours is like a sequel to that.
You know, I was but not in a big way. I mean, I was familiar with it, you know, of the many things that I knew in terms of continuity and Marvel things. It wasn't, and the combination of characters that became Nightstalker were for me, you know, just very. They were just kind of presented to me by Bobby as like, we want to do something with these characters, but we don't know what to do with them. And I was in the same place Howard was, you know, in the sense of it was a proposal. Other people were clearly writing proposals. There was no guarantee that I would win that proposal. In fact, I was simultaneously writing a proposal for Son of Satan that I thought I was a shoo-in on, and that was the one I was really kind of going after. But so these characters were presented, and I just did research. I read up on them more than thinking about an exact moment like Chris just had. Which is a wonderful moment when you read that one line and you realize something happened. It was like when I did the Daredevil story, with the Kingpin, and there was that one line in Frank Miller's story that he wrapped up the billy clubs to use for later. It's like nobody else had thought about, well, what happened to those billy clubs? And that's where I said, well, he stashed them away somewhere. But so I think the assembly of that moment of suddenly saying, well, what are you going to do with these characters? Why are they together? And suddenly these ferociously supernaturally based characters are actually on the hunt for the supernatural. Was, to me, if I remember it correctly, the turning point and what was so unusual about the proposal versus what maybe anybody else had done.
I love it. Wait, Howard,
here's a piece of funny trivia with Nightstalkers. For years before they did it, I had actually been trying to get a Nightstalkers book off the ground.
Before it was called Nightstalkers?
Well, it was called Nightstalkers, except for the creator was the two creators was a writer named Shally Fish and an artist named James Fry, and it was a funny version, sort of like Ghostbusters, and we could never get it off the ground. They just would never. They would nobody took it seriously, and then it sat, and then all of a sudden when Nightstalkers came out, I get this phone call from Shally. Hey, what happened?
with those characters?
Yes.
Because I came up with that title.
I know.
Like that was, I knew
it was just really funny because but he called up and I was like, I don't know. I said, this is because it's a completely different book. It was just really funny, because I'd almost forgotten about it because, I spent a couple of years and everybody just went, no. So it was kind of funny. Little piece of trivia.
That is funny. I was concerned they wouldn't want to call it Nightstalkers because of the Darren McGavin thing. I remember.
I wondered if that's where you got the name from, was the show.
Not directly, but it was a big concern to me, and I remember bringing that up with Bobby, and I don't think she knew the show at all, so she could care less.
But it sounded cool.
She looked at me like, "What are you talking about?" All right, we're gonna call it Nightstalkers. Let's just go with it then. We're gonna stop worrying about it.
It'll look good on a title.
Yeah, and it did.
It does. It's a great title.
It is a great title. Yeah, Howard. So one of the original characters you created was Lilith. Where'd that come from? Because she was.
Well, I'm gonna have to
hang on.
Wait, no, I want to explain because I want to correct. No, I did not create Lilith. I wrote the first issue. I wrote the first issue, and that's sometimes where creator credit goes on. But I was going to explain. I chose not to correct the question when I first saw it because. If I can, a little backstory is this all happened with the Rise of the Midnight Suns. And I've discussed this part with you, Dan, right? About my recollection of that first meeting where we were all sitting. I think we were in a conference room.
In Westchester, right?
Yeah, or in Long Island or something.
Whatever. I just remember I was so pissy about the whole thing. I had no interest in being there at that point. We were like, I was 2 or 3 years into Ghost Rider. Once the title took off, everybody wanted to guest star Ghost Rider in their books. And I remember at one point I was in an editor's office and a popular writer artist had called, was on the phone, and the editor turned to me and said, "Oh, Howard, such and such, he wants to use Ghost Rider. I mean, in his book." And I said, "Okay, good. Then talk to Bobby." He said, "Here, he wants to talk to you." Handed the phone to me. I said hello, and the guy said to me, "Yeah, so tell me about Ghost Rider. What's his deal?"
Nice.
And as nicely as I said, "Read the fucking book."
Right.
I'm not doing your work. And I handed the phone back to the editor. So anyway, now I'm through that stage, and we're at this meeting, and I have such a vivid memory of this. There was a big conference there. I don't think it was on Long Island, or I think it was Midtown Manhattan, because there was a bank. There was a bank of windows, and it was like like a post-war hotel building with radiators along one side with radiator covers, and everybody's sitting around the table, and me being the pissy little, shit that I was, decided I wasn't sitting with everybody else. I sat on the radiator cover, looking out the window saying, yeah, whatever you guys want to do, you're all creating your own stupid books. What do I care? And Dan, at one point, raised the idea of having the mother of all demons, Lilith. Yep. At which point I turned around and went, what? And that's what threw me back to the table. And I've had lengthy conversations a number of years ago, and I always give you credit, Dan, just so you know.
We all did it. That's where I was.
Yes, I believe we all built up. And the image really was inspired by Bobby, because I remember the one thing she asked for was, ooh, can she look like Maleficent? Exactly. Because I love Maleficent. Yeah. And that's
that.
Yeah.
That's where the look came from. But a couple of years, or probably sort of 10 years now, I had gotten gotten contacted by a college professor from Texas who had been raised in Oklahoma, but he was a rabbi, and he taught religious studies, and he was doing a white paper about the use of the influence of Hebraic myth and legend on popular culture, and somebody had brought Lilith to his attention, and so I'm having a several hour long phone conversation with this guy. The most ironic part was that he was Jewish and a rabbi, and I'm, of the two guys on the phone, I was the only guy that had a real bagel because he grew up in Oklahoma and Texas, and I'm from Brooklyn. But aside from that, I remember one of his early questions to me was, so how did you guys do this research that allowed you to get all of this, make this stuff so accurate, with like the Leviathan and, all of the stuff we did? And he said, because at that time, he said, I did the research. There was only one book that touched upon the Aramaic and the Babylonian mythology that involved Lilith as Adam's first wife and all that. And I remember saying to him, I'm really sorry, Professor, but what you have to realize is we're comic book writers. I think, Dan, you had like the smallest description from some, offhanded, book. And we just made the rest of it up. It was, oh yeah, that'd be cool. And I mean, I think you brought the idea of the divination through the intestines of and we said, oh yeah, so we'll make it like a big whale that's been stuck in the ice, and then somebody's no, it's got to be a Leviathan at that point. And so we just kept playing off of each other, and it made me be less pissy and more accepting of the books that we're going. So my point is, I did not create Lilith. I believe, as a group, but it was, the person that lit the fire was Dan.
That's good. That's a great story.
Features in a major motion picture. Everything I just said was a complete lie. It was all me.
Yeah,
all me.
I talked about the penance there, so it's
Howard, we're going to switch gears before we switch gears from Ghost Rider, I want to talk about Johnny Blaze, because I loved Johnny Blaze, and were you always planning on bringing him back, or that was?
Well, yeah. As I said, my biggest disappointment was when I was told I could pitch for this series, but I couldn't use Blaze. I wanted to use Blaze, and so to an earlier statement, how did we know it was a hit? Was when sales were going through the roof and around issue 4, and at that point, I realized, yeah, okay, now I'm going to bring back Blaze. because I'm going to have a little cloud here.
He was a great foil for so John Blaze was a great foil for Ghost Rider. I thought he was fantastic.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I mean, I would like, I mean, you asked me about the inspiration for Danny Ketch. Danny Ketch was a younger version of me. What I was tapping into, to Greg's point to a certain extent, about some of the stories I wrote was Blaze was, you know, the somewhat older version. At that point, this was what, 92? Or 93 or 92? I had 2 daughters at that point, and Blaze had 2 kids, and there was a lot of me as a now somewhat, as much as you can mature in while writing comic books, a maturing adult was more the Blaze side of it. And Danny
Blaze had a shotgun. You had a shotgun with rock salt in your office.
No, exactly. That's why I had the shotgun. Yeah. So
that was great. I mean, I loved him. And then I'm skipping ahead just a little bit. I'm bouncing around a little bit. But you did write a mini series with Blaze. Was that the idea? Was he eventually going to get his own book? I mean, so on the screen here, I have Spirits of Vengeance. So eventually Blaze was so I'm assuming Blaze was so popular. That's why he and Ghost Rider had their own book. And eventually it went from, he got his own mini series. Chris, you were the editor on that. Was it because you were hoping to spin? He did eventually get his own series, correct? Yes, 94.
Did he? Did I write it or no? Somebody else wrote it.
Larry Hama took it over. That was my next question. It's like I loved. So I'm skipping around and I'm jumping and I lost my notes.
I thought the original plan was to have just for Ghost Rider to have his book, and then you were going to originally do just a Blaze book, and then the powers that be said, no, make it a team up book. Am I remembering that wrong?
Honestly, I have no memory at all of those machinations. I mean, I at that point I was probably writing way too much. That's one of why I would not have taken on another book, and certainly not another Ghost Rider book. There's a limit.
Because I think about it, you're writing Spirits of Vengeance, you're writing Ghost Rider, then you also wrote the mini series to Blaze, and I think you also write a couple of all of you were writing stories for Marvel Comics Presents.
I was doing the lead feature for Marvel Presents, and I was doing Spider-Man.
That's right.
I was doing way too much work. I mean, I'm saying that honestly. It's fortunately I was younger and I didn't need as much sleep. The theory was always that I would work late into the night and then sleep in the morning. But I rarely did that. But I didn't go to bed back then until 3:30 or 4 o'clock in the morning.
Wow.
And it was way too much. And it's not good for the work. But it is what it is. I was having fun. That's the reality. And when you're the fun is a great motivator. And the money wasn't bad. But I couldn't have done it just for the money. I had to have still been enjoying it. And I do have to say, and I'm being serious, I was completely opposed to the Midnight Suns stuff until we started doing it.
Well, and that's what I want to segue into. So was the idea to expand on I'm calling it the Ghost Rider verse, but it's really the supernatural corner of Marvel. Was that always the intention, or no, it came from the success of Ghost Rider and Spirits of Vengeance?
Well, I mean, I don't think they knew there could be a success. Okay. I mean, an expansion until there was a success of Ghost Rider, and then then you want to start layering on that success, because and somebody else jump in here and say, but at that point, really the only supernatural adjacent book that Marvel was producing was Doctor Strange. And most of the other supernatural books that had been tried over the years were often, critically acclaimed but never generated the sales. And so Ghost Rider showed that you could do sales. And the reality is that, I mean, it was, and I got to tell you, in all sincerity, Ghost Rider was not critically acclaimed, certainly not issue number 1. I happen to remember my favorite bad review, which was from Heroes Magazine. Is that what it was called?
Yep.
Yeah. And they referred to my writing, and I thought this is such a great turn of phrase, as crushingly mediocre.
Wow.
And that the artists deserved better.
Wow.
And it was only after that came out, my assistant, I was still on staff at the time, and my assistant, David Wohl, said to me, "Howard, do you remember that guy?" And I said, "I have no idea." He apparently had come in trying to get work from my office, and and apparently, I guess I can't say this conclusively, but I guess his stuff didn't meet my standards, and I didn't reject him. Now, I don't believe that I don't know that it was necessarily a tit for tat kind of thing, but it was interesting to me, and but I just love that turn of phrase, crushingly mediocre. So I really rode that in a flaming motorcycle all the way to the bank.
Stephen, as I recall, it was the success of Ghost Rider that fueled the idea. And somebody jump in and correct me. It was basically Bobby's idea that she saw an opening with the success of Ghost Rider and an area of the Marvel universe that hadn't been explored that much, and she kind of pursued it. But I see Greg shaking his head.
Yeah, I was gonna say he says no.
Okay.
Basically, Howard figured out how to do a character that made a shitload of money.
Okay.
And was very successful. And Marvel went, "Hey, we want a lot of money, and maybe we can exploit what Howard's doing." And Bob Harris, who was, understood how family books worked, so he said to Bobby, "You've got a great success. You should grow on that." Because at the time they were thinking about doing. I remember it as you wanted to do a Blaze book, but not a Ghost Rider and Blaze, just Blaze. And from there you went to that, and then all the other books kind of came together to form this group that they thought was going to be this big super duper thing, but it did sort of all leech off of everything that Howard was doing. And I think the books would probably have actually been better books had they not been part of that, because all the books had to connect to each other at first.
Greg, while I have you, I don't want to lose this.
Yeah,
I don't want to lose this point. But Greg, you also, Howard, you mentioned Ghost Rider is appearing in every book. It's not untrue, because Greg, you used Ghost Rider and Deathlock. I'm assuming that's because Ghost Rider was hot at the time, and you wanted to.
Yeah, it's hot, but it's fire.
But I mean, you used him in a really good story that Howard actually pulled off on. So I'm curious, Howard, when someone's using your character, right? And I asked this of all of you, when Marcus, you're writing Cage, when Chris, your characters, the Redeemers, are being used. Bobby was sort of there. Bobby Chase was sort of the nucleus or whatever, controlling it. Does she let you know, or do they call you directly, or what happened?
Oh no, I mean, well, it really depends. But two things. One, it's important not to think of it as your character, because it's not. And all of that stuff is open. I mean, Ghost Rider was literally used everywhere. For me, Deathlock, having Ghost Rider and Deathlock, not a stretch. I would say they occupied the same corner of the Marvel universe, maybe down the block from one another or the next street. Ghost Rider, when he appeared, and nobody's a bigger fan of Walter Simonson than I am, but he had Ghost Rider in the Fantastic Four. Mm-hmm. That seemed to stretch to me, and but the editor is always the quarterback or the coach or the general manager, all rolled into one. Every appearance is run through the editor, and they usually, Bobby would always run things by me as well to get my feedback, but she was always the one going to make the final call.
Yeah.
So that is the way it works. I mean, I think one of the few exception to that was, I remember, and this was strictly a money-making ploy, quite frankly, was when Jim Lee, I think I ran into him somewhere and he said, "Oh, you know, I kind of like Ghost Rider. Can we do something with Ghost Rider? And I want to do something with the Brood. I thought that would be cool." And okay. Yeah, you know, that's basically, you know,
That's
just
right.
you know, write a check to me and then put it in the mail. And that, you know, and then, you know, but then ultimately from that point on, it all had to, if Bobby had said, "Oh no, that's stupid, I don't want our sales to go up even more," that would have been fine. But Bobby, not being stupid, said, yeah, let's go for it.
Yeah, ultimately it's about getting the character. It's about having one person that you can go to, and if you have a good editor, that editor is going to take care of the character. And one of the things of taking care of the character is checking with the writers and making sure that whatever story there is, because they get to read the story that the character's in, is gonna mesh with who the character is. If their character appearing in another book isn't gonna be a completely different character just because they're up against another character.
Right.
But also they're smart, like Bobby. They're gonna check with the writer to make sure they're not stepping on any toes. It's like, oh, I'm doing this story, and gee, I was gonna do that exact same type of story with a completely different character in 2 issues, so that kind of ruins this.
Mark, well, I've got you, and we're going to get to Dan. Dan, I'm coming to you with Nightstalkers. That's where I'm going with Rise of the Dark Midnight Suns. But before we get to Nightstalkers, Marcus, you wrote a really profound story of Blade in Marvel Comics Presents number 64. Do you remember the story?
I do, because this was one of my first stories.
Yeah.
One of the things that Marvel Comics Presents was really good at was that it was a good proving ground. Terry Kavanagh was really good at helping writers to get better with really short stories. It was a really short format. It was 6 pages. You have to do a good story in 6 pages. You have to write a plot and make it a cohesive story. And
that's art itself. Yeah.
Yeah. So
it's harder to write a 6-page story than it is a 22-page story.
I would imagine. Yeah.
Yeah, without having 50 million balloons all over the place, as evidenced here.
How did the story come about there? Did they give you the character? Is that a character you're interested in? Or
well, yeah, it was a character I was interested in, and you pitch stories. And
okay.
You know, you pitch your 6-page story. If Terry likes it, he'll let you write it, and then he reads it and checks it with the editor. You know, he had so much work to do checking every character. Every character was assigned to an editor, so that every editor had to read every story that Terry read, and Terry had to read a lot of stories and, you know, deem which ones he actually wanted to go forward with, and then have a whole big pile of them so they can slot into any given series, you know, to back up the main supporting 6-pager continued story that would go for a year.
So this was 1990. Do you know if there were any plans for Blade? I mean, when you're a young writer, you're given this opportunity. Were you expecting anything, or no? You're just like, I'm gonna write the best story I can.
No, I wrote stories for the characters that I liked. I mean,
yeah.
I pitched a story. I remember, Howard, I don't know if you remember this. I pitched a story for Chuck Norris and whatever they were.
The Karate Commandos.
The Karate Commandos. Like, I was just, I was scattershotting, but there were a bunch of characters I liked, and that's why, I ended up writing a lot of Black characters, because those are the ones that I would go and want to buy and want to read about. So I did Blade, I did Cloak, I did I did Cage there for the first time. And just every character that I could think of that I grew up reading, that I saw that looked like me, I wanted to write. I wanted to just touch on a little bit.
And any viewers, if you haven't listened, we actually did an earlier interview, and Marcus talks about that very Cloak story, because I loved that Cloak story, and I also loved Cage. So Dan, Marcus wrote this amazing Blade story, and nothing happens with the character Blade, which as a kid, I didn't love Tomb of Dracula. My father had the whole series. My father is what got me into Marvel Comics. But I loved the Blade character. I did like Tomb of Dracula. I take that back. I didn't love it like my father loved it. My father, as an adult now, I respect it much more. I didn't really know what I was reading, I guess. But I loved the Blade character. I loved Marcus's story, which kind of made me a Blade fan, but nothing ever happened.
Yep.
Then a couple of years later, 2 years later, you create a proposal for Nightstalkers. Is that what happened?
Yeah, I as I recall it, Bobby approached me and said, we want to do something with these 3 characters. but they didn't have any ideas of what to do. Just like, we want to combine these three characters somehow and use them in a book together. So that was the jumping off point. Just go away and imagine, well, what are they going to be? Are they going to be adversaries? Are they going to be hunting each other? Are they going to be doing?
They kind of were.
And, right, they were really miserable, grumpy characters in retrospect.
Yeah.
But to me, in looking at them and looking at the background, and then just trying to see, well, what's the thing that flexes for me, was that twist that these very supernatural characters become supernatural hunters, which I have to imagine was probably, maybe, I didn't know what the other proposals were, maybe the more unique angle on it, and that was what, opened the door and got me the assignment. Were you on that, Chris, at that point? I can't remember. Were you the
wait, no, was I? Yeah, I was.
I don't remember that you were,
yeah.
so I don't know.
I was.
Do you remember any of the other proposals for that, or?
Nope.
Just mine, because mine was so wonderful. But
there you go. It wiped everything out of
your mind. But I think it was
like, who are you?
It was exactly pretty much. Wait, that doesn't look anything like him. And sometimes that's it. It's the combination of remnants, characters that nobody wants to do something with. What Howard was saying before about the orb or something like that, or we were talking last time, nobody's using Von Strucker or something like that. Sometimes it's the elements that just suddenly put something together in your mind. And I went in, and I think this was always my best work when I did it. I was very guileless about it. I just wrote a proposal that I liked. I wasn't trying to angle for something. I wasn't saying, oh, I want to get in the Ghost Rider universe. I was given an opportunity. I just wrote what I thought would be a cool story. And I always think when I tripped myself up on things, which there were many times, would be when I was trying to triangulate around something versus just writing, this would be something I'd want to read. And that's where it was fun.
What is it about you and horror? Because Marcus was your editor for Terror Incorporated, another great series we talked about in August. That's absolutely a horror. It's comedy, but it's horror, right? But you also wrote Hellraiser too. You were editor on Hellraiser. When we're going to get to the epic stuff, but what is it about you, Dan, in horror?
It's what I grew up with. I grew up with a family that my aunt was always dragging me away to midnight movies, or we'd watch late night chiller theater things. Halloween was, my parents dressing up in truly horrifying costumes, at Halloween to scare kids. There's a picture on my screen right now of them. And Halloween was like our holiday. We would go all out, not to give candy away, but to scare the living shit out of anybody who showed up at the door. And this was what we were about. And that was my mainline drug, was a friend of my mother's at 12 giving me my first Stephen King book and saying, I think you'll like it. You don't give a 12-year-old The Shining at that point in time. Now it doesn't matter, but that was like, oh my God, I am so terrified, and yet I can't stop turning these pages. And then, from there it was more King, then you go off on your Lovecraft angles, you go all these places. Yep. And it was really always something that just spoke to me. I like being scared. I like the idea of playing with those types of toys. And so it was a very natural place to play. And still is.
Yeah. Yeah. Shout out to my aunt, sis, because she also gave me my first Stephen King novel, and I went down the same rabbit hole. So
exactly.
Definitely. Out of all three characters, you've got Blade, you've got Hannibal King, and you've got Frank Drake with Linda, his gun.
Yes.
Who did you enjoy writing the most?
It was funny. I and especially rereading them, thinking about this, I really liked them all. I think in retrospect, they were all too miserable. Like they were always growling and screaming and, chomping at each other, a bit too much. And especially Blade, I don't think I ever had him smile, but I felt like there was no one that I felt I had a favorite. They all represented something in their own right. And that was, and to me, that's that you have a good dynamic then, because otherwise you start giving all the love to Blade, you start giving all the love to the technology, with Frank Drake, or you start playing your vampire motifs up too much. And I found that I liked them all enough that I always wanted to give them a moment and a scene and a friction, between them.
So and you also had Doctor Strange. He was kind of even when he wasn't on panel, he was still sort of pulling their strings. Why? Okay, well, I guess my first question is to all of you: why wasn't Doctor Strange part of the Midnight Suns? And how involved really was he with the Nightstalkers? Do you think, Dan?
I know.
Well, because go back there, because it's like I remember us in that meeting, wherever the hell it was.
The editor of Doctor Strange didn't want Doctor Strange to be part of the Midnight Suns.
Who was the editor then?
Carl. He didn't want to give up the character.
Carl, I know you're watching.
To be part of the Midnight Suns. You could use him, but he didn't want him to be specifically part of the group. So that's the reason that he.
Because I know we had many conversations about Strange having to be some kind of godfather, or it made no sense that
he comes into your stories, Dan. Chris, you used him, but he didn't. I mean, I think out of all of, he does. He has an important role in Dan's book, but Dan didn't. Chris, he's an important role in Chris's book, but Chris, you only used him for like one storyline, if I'm right. Right, and
Yeah,
Dan, you used him. But he wasn't really there. He was kind of just pulling the strings.
He was a puppet master.
The puppet master, yeah.
I mean, in some ways, I think maybe Doctor Strange is a little too metaphysical, whereas the Midnight Suns were all very sort of grounded in the here and now, and the street fighting and that dark corner of the Marvel universe, even though it was supernatural, was not metaphysical so much.
Your book particularly, right, Chris? I mean, really, they're the normal guys. I'm using finger quotes. The normal guys.
Yeah, that was the point. It was important to me that they not have superpowers. Otherwise, it's not really a horror book.
Yeah.
I think it's also what Chris, is I think revealing there is that, if you put Strange in it too much, then you lose all other effect, because
for sure.
the Sorcerer Supreme should be able to shut this down in 12 seconds.
Yeah.
Almost like Superman's DC Superman, right? He's so powerful.
Right.
Yeah.
So you have to sort of say he's distracted with other bigger things, and these guys are doing whatever they're doing, cleanup acts or other things around that, and that's what allows you to get away with stories like this.
Dan, you also used Hydra, which we talked about last time in August. I loved your use of Baron von Strucker and you really made Hydra badass again.
And everybody picked up on that.
But you brought in the Nightstalkers, and you were again, you created some really cool characters. You and Ron Garney and Tom Palmer, who were your art team.
Yeah, that's a great shot.
That was your intention. You were like, I'm going to use Hydra. Because you were writing.
Go ahead, Steve. Sorry.
Nope, sorry. You go. Sorry.
No, this is again, where do your reference points, come forward? Collecting a clip file of oddities and books about demons and strange paranormal stuff. Invariably, when Nazis used to be bad guys, more clearly bad guys. Well,
I didn't realize that had changed.
Yeah, you may have missed out the very fine people thing, but the Anin Nebri, was the supernatural whatever division of the Nazis, right? That was the paranormal research group, of Hitler's army, right? Looking for artifacts and all this nonsense. So that was the direct inspiration for this, Department of Occult Armaments, and saying, well, if Hydra is still following some of its roots in going back to Strucker and his Nazism, because Nazis are good villains, can't you play that out and become that some aspect of that could become supercharged for this? And I thought it was a fun and grisly way to play it out with these guys.
How about to all of you guys? How much research really goes into all of this? Do you pick and choose? Is it just a natural process of being a writer?
I did a lot of research on everything because it gave me an excuse to read books that were fascinating. Most of the stories that I wrote, were, came out of books that I read that I found interesting, whether I was reading the Mole People or about the gangs of LA, or if I was reading about serial killers or whatever, I would just read a lot. So that wound up, in what I wrote, and if I was going to have to write a story about something specific, I would give me an excuse to go buy a book and actually read. For me, yeah, I mean, that was part of the fun.
Nice.
Yeah, for me, it was like, again, it was the opportunity to take all of the variety of things that I had read over the years. I had to give a speech in ninth grade English class. I had to do a 5-minute speech, and I did mine on witches, werewolves, and vampires.
Wow.
And so there was, this was just, as Dan said, I mean, you know, surrounding myself and absorbing myself. And it goes to the point that I'd spoken to the college professor about in terms of Lilith. It's that I don't feel like there was research that was done there as much as there were bits and pieces of knowledge that we had all accumulated over time that then got put through this meat grinder that was able to come through. I honestly don't recall doing a lot of outside research, but you know, I'm a voracious reader. I always encourage anybody who wants to write comics that you really need to be reading a lot more than comic books. And I would say when I was writing the most, you know, the greatest number of comics that I had done, I was not reading very many comic books. I was looking at some. I really wanted to read the kinds of comics that were as far away from the type of stuff that I was trying to write as possible to escape. But for the most part, I was reading absolutely everything else. I think we all went through our Stephen King phase. You said Shining was your first. For me, it was Salem's Lot was the first.
Salem's Lot.
There's just crap out of me. And funny thing is, my 31-year-old pregnant daughter just borrowed my copy of Salem's Lot because it's one of the 3 book clubs that she's a member of. And I said, oh, well, this will be interesting. See, it scars the my grandson. But yeah, so for me, it was just, you know, I live in a house where I'm surrounded by books. Right now, you can't see any of them; they're all there. But I remember it was 1984. Deb and I were invited to Walton Weezy's apartment on the Upper West Side for New Year's Eve. Mm-hmm. And I walked in, it was a small apartment, very small apartment. But I walked in and every single wall was covered with books. I'm not exaggerating. Every wall. You walked down.
I can believe it. Yeah.
And it was lined with books. And I didn't come from a family that I was the reader in my family. And so having and possessing books was not something that we did. And I walked in and I turned around to Deb and I said, this is what I want. Someday, this is what I want. And I did to this day. I mean, I just walk around our house at times and I just found, a collection of short stories by Isaac Asimov. What is it? A Billion Names of God. And I just pull it out and I put it on a table and I'll probably read it tomorrow. No, right. I just pulled out The Halloween Tree by Ray Bradbury. And I know where every single book in my house is. So when my daughter called me and said, Dad, do you want a copy of Salem's Lot? I said, yeah. And while I was on the phone, I just walked over to one of the, dozens and dozens of bookcases we had. And I pulled it out and I put it on a table and I said, you can pick it up. But all of that stuff, for me, all of that stuff is grist for the mill. I mean, I don't necessarily always even know what I'm being influenced by, but I'm pretty sure I'm always being influenced by something.
From readers to writers, did all of you want to write comics?
Want to write? I think all of us wanted to write.
Right.
Yeah. I love comics. Forever.
Movies.
I didn't want to write. I wrote. But as I said, I wrote with no intention of anybody ever reading because that scared the crap out of me. Still does. And I very quickly, what happened was I was assistant editor on Iron Man, and Denny O'Neil was writing it, and then Jim Shooter fired him in the middle of a storyline. And Mark Grunwald had lined up David McLaurin to take over the book, but he had no interest in finishing up somebody else's storyline. So Mark and I, as an editorial team, had to sit down and discuss what we're going to do. And Mark said, we need to wrap up Denny's storyline. I said, yes, we do. He said, we need to find a writer who's going to be able to do it. I said, yes, we do. He said, it needs to be somebody who's very familiar with what Denny was doing and planning on doing. I said, yes, it does. He said, it's going to be you. And I said, oh, no, it's not. And Mark gave me a line that I used countless times as an editor when I became a full editor and as a parent. Mark just looked at, and everybody here knows Mark's deadpan face. And he just said, I'm sorry, you're confusing what I just said for a request.
I use that line with students.
That's how I started writing. And I use that as anytime I told my daughters something needed to be done, and they'd say, oh, okay, no, I don't think so. And I said, oh, no, you're confusing that with a request. And I use that at least, and here I will name drop. I remember at one point I was editing West Coast Adventures, and Steve Englehart was writing
one of my favorite books growing up.
That's great, but Steve and I had a contentious relationship.
Okay, all right.
Because I was a new editor, and he was a long established pro, and he felt like he could push me around a little bit. And sales were tanking on the book. And I was called into Mark Grunwald's, it was into Tom's office with Mark as the executive editor, and they said, you got to do something about sales. And I said, yeah, I agree. They said, we think you need to put Iron Man in the book. And I said, okay, great. And so I called up Steve and said, just had a meeting with Tom and Mark, and we need to put Iron Man in the book. And Steve just said to me, no. And I took a breath and I said, oh, I'm sorry, Steve. You're confusing what I just said for a request. Iron Man's going to be in the book. The only question at this point is who's going to write it. And Iron Man was in the book for as long as Steve stayed on.
And then you were John Byrne on. Sorry, Chris, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I became an assistant editor because I wanted to write. I knew that, there's no way for people to really critique your writing the way they can critique your art. Say at a con, and someone looks at the art and they can tell right away whether or not you have the chops, but they can't do that with writing. So I knew that, the route that a lot of people took to become writers was they worked as editors first. And then they would earn some trust, and people would become familiar with them. They try their hand at a few things, and then eventually, be able to write. So that's why I became an assistant.
Christian, why comics though?
I just love the form. It combines words and pictures in a way that is really powerful for telling a story. And there's no limits in many respects, whereas the conventions of cinema, less now than it used to be, limit you, TV limits you, with a comic book, it's whatever anybody can draw, and that's everything. So I just find it a very powerful, interesting medium.
It's better than a movie, right? I mean, it's the movie plus more. We used to get into the thoughts.
If you think about it, the movies start with the comic books. Their storyboards are comic books. So
100%.
Yeah.
I remember I was one of the editors. I was one of the assistant editors in the group of assistant editors. I think Howard just missed it because he became an editor. But like me and David Wall and Mark Seary and Mike Rockwitz and that's probably as far as my memory is going to allow me to go. But like we get all together, and like they would do assistant editor school to teach us how to be better editors and the rules and Mark.
Not they, Grunwald, Mark
Yeah.
Grunwald.
Yeah.
I will tell you, while I missed the formal version of assistant editor school, I was the practice. That's where Mark formulated it, because he told me at one point, and this was not certainly not a criticism of Mike Carlin, although what did he ever do after working for Mark? I don't know. But Mike Carlin was Mark's first assistant, and then I came in, And they were so just like in the deep end of the pool at that point, because it was the first version of the official handbook of Marvel Universe, as well as doing all the books. And Mike was a very talented and capable individual, but Mark felt like he never had a chance to formally, train him in the way that he wanted to. And now Mike obviously was more capable of absorbing than many people, because he went on to have a very good career. But Mark told me, he said, that's not how I'm going to handle with you. And so all of those lessons you got, and I do still have a copy of the official handbook. I mean, of the assistant editor's
I have it.
book
Carl
that
asked me to
Mark
find it a while ago, and I couldn't find it. I think I found pieces of it.
I have it now. I keep meaning to get it scanned because a number of people have asked me about it. So I can't remember. I can't even remember who it was, but somebody in the bullpen had a copy of it, and I found out, and he just sent me. He mailed me a copy. So my intention is to scan it, and if I do and get copies printed out, I'll send it to anybody who wants it. But but yeah, that's so I like to say I was the beta model of the assistant editors school.
Yeah, it's so cool.
Yeah. Because he'd already figured out how to do it with you. So with me, he just sort of did it. You know, I mean, he didn't have to see what would work. He knew. Yeah. He knew how to get me to do exactly what he wanted, and that, and that was it.
So I'm gonna circle back. Nightstalkers. There is an excellent. It's a 3-part story that goes from Nightstalkers to, by then, Greg, and we'll get back to Morbius. But Greg, you were writing Morbius at the time. Dan's writing Nightstalkers. How did this story come about? Because you've got Hannibal King, who's he's a vampire at his own, right? And then there's Morbius. I can't remember if they actually had connected before or not, if they had history. It sort of seems like a natural, but it's an epic storyline, that like mini crossover. How did this story come about, guys?
Bobby Chase told me I needed to do a crossover with Nightstalkers, so I called up Dan.
Can I say that's a really homoerotic image there? I'm like,
great though, isn't it? Come on, Chris.
I'm all about that.
Awesome image.
I'm all about that. That is
I absolutely am digging that to no end. Yeah, I think this goes back to just that familiarity we were talking about so much last time, Steve, and Steve has left. This is a boring conversation for him. In the sense of just we all knew each other so well, it was easy to kind of just say, how are we going to make this work? There wasn't a lot of heavy lifting or challenging egos. It was like, we're going to do this and let's figure out a way to make it fun for each other.
Do you guys remember? Sorry, I had to step out. I have a very demanding Bengal cat. She's a bit of a diva. I apologize. Do you guys remember? Okay, you're told to do it. Do you remember how? You guys were close beforehand, correct? You guys were already friends from.
We were best friends in college.
Yeah,
that's right.
From forever. Yeah. No, but I mean, that was the thing is that for whatever reason, nobody was crossing over with Nightstalkers, and and I had developed this reputation of if an editor wanted to fix something or to have a crossover with somebody, they would ask me, because I would just say, sure. And, for me and Dan, it was very easy. So, she said, I want you to do this. I said, okay. And, we just took it from there and, tried to see what we could get away with.
And you guys got away with a lot. We're going to get there. Okay. So Dan, talk to me about Blade, because Blade, again, was one of my favorites because of Marcus.
Not because of you, Dan, just because of Marcus.
Sorry, let me rephrase that.
Many parts of my career.
If not for Marcus's story, and I probably wouldn't have picked up Marvel Comics Presents had I not gone on one of those boring trips, that my parents took me to every summer, right? But I remember just grabbing as many Marvel comics as I could, and just my brother and I trading them off in the backseat of the car. Had I not read Marcus's story, I probably wouldn't have read Nightstalkers. Which I'm glad I did, because from there I became a massive Ron Garney fan. We have to give it props to all the artists that you guys work with.
Yeah.
And he's one of the few artists I followed throughout my comic collecting years. Do you feel though that so the Blade movies didn't come out with Wesley Snipes didn't come out for many years, but do you feel like you set the tone for the Blade movie? Maybe a little.
No, I wouldn't. I'd love to take credit for anything. But I don't think that that's the case. I mean, I think we did it was a great job with Blade. I think but I don't feel that the movie picked up on any of that. I mean, I think the third movie may have name checked Nightstalkers in some way or shape or form.
It was going that way, yeah.
But I don't think it actually had any really connection to what we did. But I don't think that there was any sort of sense of, wow, they did this with this character here. Let's base the character. The character felt to me that's based on the opportunities that the character provided and Wesley Snipes himself. That was, and I remember seeing that at a preview before it came out because we got some Marvel tickets or whatever, and just coming out of that and feeling, wow, that was extraordinarily hardcore, like unexpectedly hardcore.
It was, especially for that time, right?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, it was a serious.
Hold up, wait. This is you saying it's hardcore. That says a lot.
Yeah, well, it was a very tight and dangerous movie, and at that point, most comic movies were almost purposefully goofy at some point or another.
For sure.
There was nothing goofy about Blade.
Yeah, because I mean, for the most part, prior to the Marvel Studios universe right now, I think anybody who approached comic books were on the screen were almost being apologetic for being involved with comic books. So they had to make fun. Even in some of the early X-Men, I think the first X-Men movie, didn't they even make fun of the colors of the original X-Men costume? Right. So everybody, and I personally think that's the difference between Marvel and DC movies right now. The cinematic universes is that the Marvel Cinematic Universe is not apologetic at all. They jump right into creating the feeling of the comic books. And I feel like the DC universe is still striving for legitimacy on some level. But before anybody responds to that, I'd just like to ask a question. The mummy in the foreground of the Nightstalkers, do you think those are underwire bandages? Because that's pretty serious there.
It was the 90s.
It's pretty striking. And the bug on there, too, is an interesting choice.
Yeah. Anyway, sorry.
Dan, so a viewer just wrote us, and I apologize because I haven't been paying enough to YouTube, but I did mean to ask this and I didn't. So whoever wrote this, I apologize, but thank you. Dan, speaking of Mike Carlin, who became editor of Superman, the death of Superman, there's a scene in Nightstalkers where you segued into, do you remember this?
Yes, but it was like one of the most WTF what the fuck moments. I have no idea that's a lift.
You wrote it.
Page. No, I didn't. That's a lift from a page in another Nightstalkers story. It's the same art, and then it was tagged on to the end of that issue. Chris, I don't know if you know who wrote it.
Wait. We gotta preface it for the viewers. So in the scene of Nightstalkers, and I apologize, I don't remember the issue, and I can't believe it's not in my notes, but I did mean to ask this. Hannibal King, who's a vampire, who is obsessed with dying and death because he can't die, right? He's a living dead, unliving dead. So he's throughout Nightstalkers and Dan's run particularly, he's always carving his name into gravestones or doing rubbings or something. Right. There's a scene where this is at the time Superman had died in DC Comics and made a big splash all over the international media. There's a scene in Nightstalkers where Hannibal King's at the foot of a gravestone, and I want to say it says Clark Kent.
Yeah, if you go back into I can't remember which issue of Nightstalkers.
I can't believe I didn't put it in my notes. I apologize.
Earlier on, that scene, that art.
It's random. It's a prologued in or something.
Right, but Hannibal visits that as an in-story scene, where he's lamenting his undead status. He's talking to himself. He's doing his monologuing or whatever. But then that Superman reference you're talking to lifted that artwork, took off whatever was on the tombstone, put on Clark Kent, and somebody else wrote that little homage to the death of Superman. So when I got the issue, it was like I'm flipping through it and then, what the hell is this thing? So,
Chris,
that was my next question. Chris, really? You don't remember?
Nope. Not at all.
I think it was probably the competitive spirit, but every now and again the companies would acknowledge something else in the other. I don't know. Did any other book do that?
No, it was the only from at least none of the Midnight Suns. And I mean, I've read every issue of Spider-Man. I didn't know if Dan, maybe you're a major Superman fan, and I'm like, oh, why didn't he ever write Superman? That would have been great. Blah blah blah. And I okay, that's weird, huh?
Truly one of those random moments that somebody.
I'm gonna ask Bobby Chase. Look out. I'm gonna
Bobby
find out.
at one point was Mike Carlin's assistant.
Maybe
right.
At Marvel.
Right.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that's the only connection that I make,
Possibly, yeah.
Dan, why did you only end up
like a thing Bobby would have done?
Yeah.
I know,
you only ended up
sales
on
and marketing. They shoved it in there without anybody knowing.
I mean, well, and it was the competition. I didn't know. Well, I mean, was Marvel and DC? You guys did the softball game back in the 80s and 90s, right? But were you guys? It was a friendly competition, right? It was never serious.
We referred to DC as our distinguished competition.
Right.
That's right. That's right.
But honestly, and I'm speaking from my personal experience, I don't believe we ever really viewed DC as our competition.
I didn't think so. Not in the 90s, right?
Not. I mean, Death of Superman certainly went through the roof, but I always felt that when I was an editor, so I was an editor from 1984 to 1991, our competition were in the offices surrounding the bullpen. Mm-hmm. Certainly, everybody was trying to compete against the X-Men and failing, but that's who we competed against. Marvel had the sales, Marvel had the characters. DC was probably better known in the to the general public, but not in the comic book industry. They were not competition at that time.
No, even as a kid, I remember I would go through waves of like DC, and I don't think, honestly, guys, we're going to get to 94, 95. I'm actually going that way. I loved Marvel, and I think all my friends loved Marvel up until probably 94, 95. And then, like, for me, in my mind, Greg knows this, Zero Hour. Zero Hour is what made me switch from Marvel, because that's when they became like family books. Like, Marvel had its own family, like Hulk became its family. Nightstalkers became its own family. Blade. So I've got on the screen here, I've got Blade the Vampire Hunter #1. So Dan, you left Nightstalkers after 11 issues. How come?
I didn't have good luck with Bobby Chase. I mean, I'll be straight up. I mean, she exited me from Daredevil, as we talked about, and
yes.
Similar situation with Nightstalkers. I mean, it was an instance where I know some art had come in that had demonstrably changed a scene in the plot, and I hadn't been asked about it. And I remember getting quite upset. Bobby wasn't the line editor at that point. It was her book. But I remember I sort of challenged that, and then I think I was just off the book after that. Now I don't know if that was a direct thing of challenging it, that you're doing work for hire. It is what it is in that regard. But that was just a second run in that same editorial suite. So
I'm going to ask a deep question, and you guys can say no, I'll move on. But I've gotten to know John Byrne over the years, and I've actually been to his house a couple of times, and he's given me his opinion of Ms. Chase. How do you feel about Bobby Chase, and what was she like working with? Because I know her. I loved the She-Hulk. I loved Midnight Suns. So as a kid, as a fan, she was it, right? She was like Mike Carlin was for Superman's house growing up. She was it. What was she like working with?
Well, I'll jump in first, and because Bobby and I are still friends. Mm-hmm. Oddly enough, I am still friends with John Byrne too, and he and I have completely different takes on Bobby. Obviously, I worked with Bobby as my editor on Ghost Rider for well over 5 years. I wound up leaving Ghost Rider when Bobby left, and the book was passed on to another editor. I felt I was done with my run at that point. Bobby and I, as I said, we are still good friends. She's on another coast. When the Ghost Rider movie came out, that horrible Ghost Rider movie with Nick Cage. Bobby and I, and you, right, Chris? Didn't you come up and we all saw it together?
Did we watch it together? I'm not entirely
I
sure
think you
we
came,
did.
we all met at Bobby's house and went to see it. Well, that's my memory. So don't.
Yes, yes, it was awesome.
Yes.
I was like,
I mean, Bobby and I started out together to a certain extent. I mean, we were assistants at the same time and came up through the ranks. And I had a good working relationship with her. Bobby, you know, I mean, we certainly butted heads at times about stuff. But, you know, we're able to move on beyond that and focus on the book. So I had absolutely nothing but a positive working experience with Bobby.
Bobby was my mentor.
And come back to me later.
Bobby was my mentor, and just like with Howard, we're friends to this day. In fact, it was Bobby along with Marie Javins who approached me about doing "It's a Bird" for DC, the Black Lives Matter comic. So, in fact, I was out in LA, I don't know, a month or two, no, I guess about 3 months ago now. And one of the few things I did was stop at Bobby's house to see her and her family and hang out. So no, I think Bobby was a great editor and she taught me a lot. And yeah, we're friends to this day.
Bobby gave me tons of work and let me do whatever I wanted. You know, I mean, I always got along with her very, very well. You know, and she let me do whatever I wanted, which was probably a mistake.
Dan, do you remember, like, you guys?
But yeah, I mean, that was the thing. You know, I never really butted heads with her, other than, you know, on Morbius, we were constantly being told to do things that had nothing to do with the character, but that wasn't really her fault. People above said, make him more of a hero, make him like the X-Men. Does he have to suck blood?
Yeah.
You know, these ridiculous things, and she would
Does he have to have white eyes and fangs?
Yeah.
No, I mean, it would be stuff like that. I mean, she would have to relay these ridiculous things to me, knowing they were ridiculous. You know, but we never, you know, we didn't, you know, and she gave me tons of work. I mean, probably more than any other editor at Marvel. So
I remember early on, Mark Grunwald, in, you know, the precursor to the assistant editor school, he had said to me, it's really important for you to remember that the relationship between the editor and the creator or freelancer is one born in conflict, because you have sometimes opposing points of view. And you know, when I was an editor at Marvel, I was told that my first loyalty was always to the characters, and you know, my opinion of what was right for the characters as an editor might not be, as per, you know, my relationship with Steve Englehart, you know, the same as the writers. And I think Bobby and I had just, and I may, you know, look, we had started Bobby was the editor through every single phase of those rewrites on the proposal that I had come up with. So I guess I had an advantage there, because we were, you know, even that corner of the universe, we were creating from the ground up together. And so it was a kind of a organic and symbiotic relationship. But as I said, there were times, I mean, she and I once had just a screaming fight with one another, and I bring it up to her to this day, how I felt like she had screwed me over on something, because I did an entire run of Ghost Rider with one fill-in, and that was her fault, not mine. And I will, you know, I stick to that story to this day. But I mean, I was really, really angry. I stormed out of her office. I slammed the door. I went into somebody else's office and punched their door, almost broke my hand. And then I came home and my wife said, "What's wrong? You know, we're supposed to be going out tonight. But, you know, our babysitters are on their way over." And I said, I don't want to talk about it. And doorbell rang and I answered the door, and there was Bobby and Craig. because they were going to watch my daughters while Deb and I went out to dinner and a movie, and that was it. It was done. But I also I realized early on, because of most of my best friendships at that point in my life were people who I came up through the ranks with at Marvel. And they were also the people I was, we all started out as assistant editors together, then we were editors together. Then I went off on the freelance track, but I was counting on them for the most part for work. And so I really had to be, it's almost sociopathic when you think of it. I had to really separate that time, that my relationship with them as editors with our friendship as well. And
I'm forever grateful. I mean, if not for Bobby Chase, there may not have been a Howard Mackie on Ghost Rider, which I grew up loving. If there may not have been a Peter David on the Hulk. So I've always been curious.
No, Bob Harris put Peter David on the Hulk.
Thank you.
Yeah,
but they really worked together for a long time. But thank you, Greg. Yeah. Damn. So you just, I mean, your 11 issues were awesome, and your final issue was kind of so it was following the it was the Midnight Sun Massacre, right? You guys remember that? That was one of your first crossovers after the Rise of the Midnight Suns. Blade had become Switchblade, right? And your last story was the follow-up of that. And it was a really great Blade story, which would segue. Chris took over because he was in charge of Nightstalkers by then, and he was in charge of that. So Nightstalkers ended shortly after, and it went into the Blade series. But you only lasted 11 issues. Were you disappointed with that? You were totally cool with that? What?
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't cool with it, but I think,
that was.
I think it's first off, I think it's somewhat unfair to talk about Bobby as much as we are without her being here.
Agreed.
And one thing that Howard said, I think, dovetails with what we were talking about last time, especially those of us who grew up in Epic, right? My training was the creator came first, right? Because we were all working on creator-owned books.
Right.
So, to my mind, and that does not mean that creators are always right. Like I had screaming matches with Mark Mattis about his book, and his creation. Not screaming matches, perhaps very vocal discussions, but that was trying to make the book better. But ultimately, it was always soliciting the creators' opinions and getting them involved in the discussions. I think there's some aspect of the Marvel approach, maybe Howard, the way you described it, that the creator becomes somewhat secondary to that. And that's
sure.
And I found the Midnight Suns initial, our get-togethers, the way we were crafting things, and Bobby's role in that, a lot of fun. Like I was grateful for her bringing me into the mix, giving me the chance to the proposal. She was really jazzed, as I remember, about the proposal. We had a great time with that session after Howard got out of his nitty little grumpy corner and joined the rest of us. I
like to think of myself as Pekingese on a silk pillow at that point. Yeah.
Warm wrapped blanket that was the radiator. And so I mean, I didn't have conflicts with Bobby. I never had any like, I don't like what you're doing, or you're not going in the right direction, or you're taking the book somewhere it shouldn't be going. So that's why it became very shocking to me, both on the Daredevil front, where I was told the news by somebody else, not her, you're off the book. And then the Nightstalkers, decision as well, which was, I have to imagine she was at least part of, but again, it wasn't, as I recall, a scene that I'd written very specifically came back, with completely different art, or a lot different art. The subject of the scene had been changed a lot. And I was like, what's going on here? And then it was, maybe it was in that call or not long after, where it was, well, you're not in the book anymore. And it was a very sudden thing, and so that certainly stuck in my craw for a long time. But that's that, I'm describing that logistically and practically, not like, if I had any bone to pick with Bobby, it would be the same bone I would have to pick with any editor that chose to approach things that way.
Greg, Mark, you guys have the three of us have backgrounds in education as educators. Is an editor akin to being a principal, whereas like the writer is the teacher? Does that make sense, or no? Totally different.
And this and the student is the audience.
Yes.
We again from Mark, because we worked with Mark. Mark was a teacher.
Okay.
You know, he would teach. It was nonstop teaching you about whatever, you know, was important, whether it was, you know, sometimes it was little life lessons, you know, things on how to, you know, deal with, you know, certain creators that, you know, you wanted to really check out a window. And, you know, and he could, you know, turn stuff around. So, you know, editor is almost like a psychologist in some cases, because, you know, it's very different when you're a creator who's never had a real job. You don't have any social skills, and you take everything some other way, because most of the decisions that an editor makes are not personal. You know, it's like Howard said, they're about, you know, serving the best purpose of the character. Whereas for a creator, like when I switched sides, suddenly it was all personal. So if somebody said, well, I don't like the direction you went, I took it personally. I didn't really take it as, you know, well, maybe I wrote a shitty story. You know, I did. I took it more personal. So, you know, certain editors were better at, you know, getting me to function the way they wanted, and certain editors were not. And it depended on, you know, each editor, because there was, you know, editors that I was more friendly with that could tell me the same thing as an editor I wasn't friendly with. And I would react completely differently, you know. You know, like I had a good relationship with Bobby. If she asked me to change something, I would just change it. There's a couple other editors, if they told me they wanted something changed, I'd say, go fuck yourself. You know,
metaphorically.
And it wouldn't have been, and it wasn't that one was more reasonable or unreasonable. It was just my own personal relationship with that editor outside of the work. And again, that's unprofessional of me, but
I don't think it's always just your relationship with them, Greg, because I had early on, I mean, if I was going to have stopped writing after I did the now classic Iron Man 211 and moved on to the even more classic Chuck Norris and his Karate Commandos, both Karate and Commandos with A, I wound up having the opportunity to, and I'm not going to mention names, but I was doing a project for one editor, and it was an ongoing, short-lived project, and I will mention this name, it's positive. I had been asked to do a proposal for a Captain America literacy project, Sid Jacobson. Okay, and the way I approached my freelance work when I was on staff was I would never have any meetings while I was supposed to be doing editing work. So I scheduled them around my lunch hour. And so I went down to the editor where I turned in a plot, and I was going to, get notes from him. And he completely accepted the plot with no changes, but I left that office feeling like I was a fraud. He did it in such a way that I thought, I don't know how to write. Why am I pretending to do this? I'm just going to move on. And then I went down to Sid's office, and he completely rejected everything I wrote, but in such a positive way that made me say, well, no, I know what you can do, that I walked out of there feeling like, oh man, that's great. And it was about 5 minutes before I realized he had asked me to change absolutely everything. And so I don't think it's always the personal relationship, but it is a skill at the interpersonal relationship between a writer and an editor. And to your point, because a lot of freelance writers, not even freelance writers alone, but freelancers in general, the creators, many of them go from art school or college directly into this field and have not worked in regular jobs, and so they don't know how to interact.
Skills. Yeah.
Okay,
and,
but
and
wait,
for your analogy, I don't think it's that the analogy of teacher and principal really works. It's just that, but I do know that. I mean, I feel like editors protect the characters, but not so much that like you would protect your child, because in a sense you give the child away to the writer, the creator, to mess with, and that sounds really horrible. That's not what I meant.
Yeah.
How are your kids managing, Mark?
Yeah. You're supposed to protect them to a degree, but let them grow. And by growing, they have to, they have to go through pain. They have to go through something really uncomfortable. You're not there to say, don't do that to them because that's not good. You're there to say, don't do that and ruin them, but do it so that they come out stronger in the end. And that you're the caretaker of that element. And there's a lot of creators that are like, I want to write this character so I can just really mess them up, and that'll be wonderful. And then the people who read the books are like, oh, this is so wild what they're doing to this character, until they've ruined the character and they're like, wow, that was really horrible. That was something else, but I don't want to read this book anymore. And that's the line that the editor's not supposed to let them go over, that I don't know if there's such a thing anymore.
So Marcus, you kind of made me think of another point, and we have to get back because the viewers they're asking questions, and we'll get to them, I promise, guys.
Wow.
But now I'm on a tangent, and I like this. So Marcus, you made a good point. What about so there's a relationship between the editor and the creators, the writers, the pencilers, etc. What about, do you as writers have a relationship with your audience? How do you find the connection there? Are you writing for you? Are you writing for them? How does it go?
You can't write. I don't believe you can write for the audience without writing for yourself, because you're the audience and you care about the characters. But you can't write worrying that someone's going to read something and say, why did you do that? Or you have to have somewhat of a thick skin.
Well, and now let's look at it. You guys were horrible to your characters. Every single one of you was horrible to your characters. Howard, I could not forgive you for destroying Blaze's circus. I'm not over it. Right? I mean, Christian, we're going to get to what you did to Louise. I'm not over it.
It wasn't a circus, it was a carnival. And it was my carnival, not.
I was crushed. What was I, 10? 10? You did that to me at 10? Oh my God, I was in my bed. I remember.
Yeah, and you're a better man for it. Life sucks. It's hard.
Man.
Grow up.
I don't know. Christian, we got to go back. We got to start Darkhold again. Louise cannot be dead. I mean, you guys, these were my soap operas, right? Like, so, okay, that's great, Marcus. Yeah. How do you guys all feel? You're writing for you, though? You're not?
You're right.
You can't write for the audience because the audience is so diverse and they all have different opinions. Every time, whatever turn you make with some 10-year-old kid is going to be traumatized. It's going to kill a bunch of people in a carnival. Or others are going to respond. And it's if you will freeze yourself in place if you try to satisfy, and you'll have a horrible story, quite frankly, if you're writing strictly to the audience, because the audience is there's not an audience. It's a very everybody has different opinions, and you can type in Howard and Mackie is awesome, and you'll get a lot of hits on the internet, or you can type in Howard Mackie sucks, and you'll get a lot more hits there, because there are people that think my writing was crushingly mediocre, and there are people that think that it was I've had people come to me at conventions recite some of my dialogue to me, which is frightening.
Top link on typing in Howard Mackie sucks. Did anything good come from Howard Mackie's Spidey? Just so you know.
There you go.
Top link.
I mean, hashtag clone saga.
Yeah.
But I am here, and I'm telling everyone, Howard, I loved your Spider-Man, and we could go on, and I even love the stuff that you and John Byrne did. I mean, I have all the omnibuses. I mean, I was that guy, right? Like that's a
thank you.
Story, and now everyone's gonna stop watching. But I mean, I did. I love it. I really, really did. All right, we're gonna go back to Nightstalkers because the fans want more. So, Chris, we're going to segue over from Dan. He left. You took over. You were still editor of the series. You held editorial reins of Nightstalkers just as it was ending, and you picked up the subsequent Blade series. The book picked it right up where Nightstalkers ended. It was written by Stephen Grant, and then I'm sorry, I'm blanking. There was a third writer, and I don't remember his name, and I do apologize. But the book picked up right where Nightstalkers ended, with the deaths of Hannibal King and Frank Drake. Blade was known for reintroducing Dracula to the Marvel Universe from the continuing subplot of Nightstalkers. Dan, you kind of started that. Do you remember?
I would lie if I said I'll take, what is Howard's line? I have no recollection of that. You know?
Okay, you started it, and then Stephen Grant kept it going, and then again, I apologize. Was it? I don't want to say the name because I don't remember.
I have my memories are so dim, but of that era and that regard. But you did zero in on two linked things: Hannibal King and Frank Drake died, and Dracula came back.
And we found out that they were stuck in help me out, guys.
Purgatory.
Thank you. How was the Blade series? Like, how was it received by fans? I loved it. I actually had rereading my copy was all beat up. I had to get a new issue because I have to have perceived. How was it perceived?
I think it was received well. People hated me for calling it Blade the Vampire Hunter instead of Blade the Vampire Slayer. That was like the most consistent criticism I remember people giving. But apparently people were really invested in that name. I think we did some interesting things. I remember the Future Blade coming back, and that was possibly going in some interesting places. But where we were originally going with Dracula was not where, I don't even know where it ended up, but the plan was somewhat different. Like I said, the two ideas were linked. Frank Drake and
Hannibal King.
Hannibal King
died.
Right.
And you remember from the explosion, their shadows were fused.
Right.
And Dracula came back.
That's why he had a blue eye and a brown eye.
Correct.
God, finally, years later. Hello, we broke the internet because even in the final issue, I think you as an editor addressed the audience apologizing, sorry guys, and you guys had laid out clues, hadn't you, throughout issues? Oh, that's fantastic.
Because it was the body of a vampire and the bloodline of Dracula together created a body through which Dracula could come back and re-inhabit and re-enter the world.
Whose idea was to do that? Was it yours or was it?
I want to say it was mine. I'm pretty sure it was mine, but you go back into the distant, foggy memories of ancient lore and.
We're giving it to you, Chris, right here, right tonight. It's yours.
I say we take it.
It's the kind of thing. It's the kind of evil twist I like to put in. So I'm pretty sure that one was mine.
It was written down in a book somewhere, but the papers were scattered all around the world.
Yeah, you're right.
But yeah, no, we never got to make that explicit, which is
what was like. Okay, so guys, I mean, we kind of jumped, and we're gonna go back in time because I still have other series to cover, and we will stay on Midnight Suns. Excuse me, but for Chris, you in particular, by then Howard had left. Dan had left, Greg left, and we're going to get to why they left. But you stuck around. What was Marvel like for you in 1994 to 95?
Oh,
you mean we had left Staff?
Howard, sorry, thank you. I apologize. Howard, you were still writing Spider-Man, correct? So Howard, jump in, you too. But both of you, what was like?
Yeah, you were still. Yeah, exactly. You were
I had just left Staff. I wrote for Marvel until 2001.
Oh, I haven't. You've left Ghost Rider 94. Is that wrong?
I think so. Yeah. Wait, maybe. 90. I thought it was 6 years at least.
Okay.
Yeah. Well.
Okay, maybe 95.
Too bad there's not a way to check this out on the internet.
That would be able to.
I'm waiting for my assistant to come hit me up with a confirmation. He'll get on that. But so Chris, I guess what I'm saying is Midnight Suns was sort of, it had changed. Blade had kind of taken over for Nightstalkers, and then Midnight Suns sort of was an upset. Do you remember what it was like for Marvel back then? 94, 95?
Gosh. Well, my tenure on staff ended not long thereafter in 96.
Mm-hmm.
So
wasn't that during all of the upheaval?
Yeah, Marvel was hitting the rough patch where books had been multiplexed, for lack of a better word, into like where there had been one title, now there were 3 or 4 titles that all sort of spun out of the same thing, diluting, in my opinion, the strength of the character and the storyline.
I would agree.
Making it hard to follow because you were supposed to read now all these books just to follow the storyline.
Right.
And then also Marvel was at the time was being managed principally with an eye towards the stock price. So as opposed to, comics has always been a marginal profit business with bust cycles, but because it was being managed with a short-term eye towards the stock price, it wasn't able to weather the bust the way it had in previous years. And so, the bust came and people got laid off, including eventually me. So
Marcus, when did Marvels come out?
Marvels came out. Marvels was like one of the last projects I worked on. So
That's
that was
what I
like
thought.
90, 95, 96.
Yeah.
Maybe.
I mean, I do. And I remember as a fan, I sort of left Marvel. I think I kept reading Spider-Man, but that was probably I think I stopped X-Men by then too, which is, X-Men was it, right? Everyone was reading X-Men.
Yeah.
Anyway, I was writing Ghost Rider until 96. Spirits of Vengeance ended in 94.
That's right. Correct. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. You're fired. He's not going to even come on camera. He's not going to even come on camera. Anyways, okay. So guys, we're going to go back to the Midnight Suns. So I am rewinding time again. Who came up with the name Switchblade for Blade? Blade ends up using a page of the Darkhold. He finds a page of the Darkhold, and he becomes this demonic demigorge. And he ends up killing basically all of Midnight Suns and absorbing their powers. Who came up with the name Switchblade?
I don't know. It sounds like something I would have done, but probably one of those things that all came up when we came up with the concept. It just sounds like it would have come out of the group meeting. What else would he be except he switched over, so he's Switchblade.
No, so Dan, do you remember though? Like I remember as a kid, I'm like, no, he would never do this. Do you remember how you found his motivation to use a page of the Darkhold? Because he's so anti-occult, so anti-vampire, right?
But I think now you're into high concept crossover engine time. Which if anything like starts to pull apart. This
becomes the second of like 3 or 4 crossovers you guys had, right?
But this is where the fun starts to go out of things, at least for me on some of these things, where we start to not necessarily do something that is naturally coming out of the story. We start to manufacture things. We're manufacturing things because we're part of a shared group. We have to generate sales. And I don't have as clear a recollection of that get together, to generate that. But I think, you invariably just start to kind of say, okay, how do we do this? How do we get some danger going for this group? Maybe one of you guys remembers it better.
That was around the time that marketing started having a much greater influence on Marvel. And we were given edicts. You need to come up with something. Honestly, I don't remember this storyline at all. You referenced Switchblade several times in the course of this discussion, and I was thinking, really?
You weren't there. At this conference, you were on the phone, and we were sitting around, a bunch of us, trying to come up with idea after idea after idea after idea, and there was an assistant editor there who was not Chris Cooper, who just kept shitting on single idea until I finally threatened him. And it was ridiculous. We had a whole bunch of horror writers, and then at one point, the one quote Bobby said that will always stick in my mind is she said, "That's too sci-fi horror." And then on the phone, we heard this thump, and we didn't know what that was, and we kept moving on, and we realized Howard had thrown the phone and left for a while.
Yeah.
So we just kept talking until I don't even know. Somebody came up with some idea that was somewhat workable, and then this is what came out of it. We just kept working on it, but I don't know who came
Guys,
up
were
with
these selling?
It's not such an out of character thing for Blade, if only because he hated the occult, and this was an opportunity to destroy it.
But he's using the occult, no?
Right.
I'm going with Christian. I agree with you, but I'm also playing devil's advocate because again, little 10-year-old me has not let this go. Clearly, I'm in my 30s, and I will get over this after tonight. I promise.
But that's the classic conflict, Steve. I think in the sense of and I'm not saying the story hit every note, but the potential of the story is there in the sense of you put a character into a situation where he or she must make a decision that is against their nature in order to achieve, some ultimate aim. So you're making a drastic choice. He's making a drastic choice in order to kind of get to the end game there.
It's a classic Jim Shooter.
It's a can't must, right? Yeah,
it's must conflict. I'm going to need to destroy that which I hate the most. I need to use part of that which I hate. So you become the monster to kill the monsters.
But whatever we did, we had to bring the characters back to where they were in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
Which makes, it's really hard to write a really good story where all this cool stuff happens if when you're done, their characters are right back where they started from and that story didn't match.
I remember this storyline vividly, sort of the opposite of Howard, if only because I got to write my second favorite issue of Darkhold because of this, which is when Modred fights Switchblade. And where Modred had fought,
epic fight.
Well, Modred fought Doctor Strange and was very much a gentleman's duel. Modred fights Switchblade, and it's a all-out, magical brawl. And I got to give a little good twist ending, so I enjoyed that issue. So I remember it vividly.
Chris, so let's talk about the Darkhold for a second. We're going to get to the actual series, but right now let's talk about the book. Whenever someone uses a page, something happens, right? There's a price.
Mm-hmm.
So
your soul is sacrificed if you use a page. The only people who were exempt from that, supposedly, were the Montesi line, because they had some weak resistance to the book.
Right. But so then, again, my favorite character, and we're going to get to Darkhold because I have to gush, and I'm waiting for this moment. Can you feel it? I'm waiting for this moment to gush. But I loved Dr. Louise Hastings. I loved her. And in this storyline, I think Howard wrote this story. It's from Spirits of Vengeance number 13. She casts a spell using the Darkhold page, right, to cure Blade, right, and she purifies him or whatever. But there's ultimately a price, right? So when this story was being written, did you know? I guess that's where my question is. Okay, that's your baby, right? The Darkhold's kind of your baby.
That's my grandmother.
Is it? Louise Hastings?
Louise Hastings was based largely
that makes it worse, and you killed her. Damn it, you killed her. I can't get over this. I loved this. I don't know what it was about this character. I loved her as a kid. I love Spider-Man, but this, we'll get there. But so is
this a therapy session for?
I guess it is. There's a reason I had to have Christian Cooper on this. There's a reason, because I love these stories, but this affects her fundamentally following, right?
Yes, well, that's the good thing. Greg was talking about how you have all these things happen and then everybody goes back to normal. And that was one thing I was glad to have to work with afterwards is that, okay, Louise is not going to be back to normal after this. She knows that her soul is now mortgaged to Cthon by doing this. So how is she going to deal with that going forward? And you see in the issues that follow, she's and she's trying to figure out how do I fix this for myself.
And I wasn't a huge fan of crossovers as a kid, right? Because then I had to collect all the issues. And I think by then I probably had a local comic store. Shout out to Comics, etc. They know who I'm talking. They're watching now because they held my comics when I was 10, 11. 93, by then I was 11. Dan wrote a really great Blade story, a follow-up of this. Christian, you followed through on this. Louise's journey takes a whole different route right after this. When you guys are creating these crossovers, is it organic or is it how does it work? How do you know what's going to happen to your characters?
Yeah, we basically had to create a map because it's like a relay race.
Mm-hmm.
So, we had to have a relay. So basically, we all kind of worked together to figure out what had to happen in this issue. So everybody knew you're going to take, the baton from this point to this point, and then this is going to happen. And then because you'd usually have to do a couple issues. We all were aware of the outline, I guess,
of the story.
Thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. We all, that was the point of these get-togethers, was to plan it out. And my recollection is it worked relatively well between our group, because I had worked in other groups where we would discuss who was going to handle which beats, and we'd all be, completely on board with who was going to do what, and then we'd get the plot from the first issue and the person that was doing it had covered everything that everybody else was going to do.
Sure.
That became a problem.
Yeah, we all seem to work. I don't remember us having any
Yeah,
conflict.
No.
I think we actually enjoyed.
You know.
I think we had a lot of fun.
Yeah. Yep.
I mean, as much as they are largely inorganic and kind of mess with your own storyline that you're trying to do, so they're kind of a pain in the ass. And as you know, Dan has said and Greg has said, they're unnatural, but it's fun to get together and hang out with these guys and bounce things around.
Right.
I think part of the ease of that, or what made it easier for us potentially, is that's how we started the Midnight Suns. You know, was
We did it together. I think so.
we did it together. I mean, you know, yes, I had my little flaming skull-headed thing going on there, but once it became Midnight Suns, it was a more organic thing. And once I got off the silk pillow or radiator, you know, was willing to play. Yeah. You know, yeah, because I mean, I'm looking at this page that's up there, and I love it. It is very evocative for me.
I love it.
I don't think I remembered that it was your grandmother, Chris. I'm sure I knew that at one point. But I also, I mean, I recently, and I have not finished it yet, but I've been watching the Hellstrom series on Hulu. And there's a lot about,
right?
What's that?
Oh, no, I'm asking Stephen if he knows about Hellstrom.
Oh, well, I was going to bring that up too, because that's another character. So there were a couple characters.
No. Louise Hastings is in Hellstrom.
Right.
No, is she? So I watched the first episode of it, and I kind of, again, I'm in grad school again for the second time, so I'm kind of half watching it. Really?
She's in every single episode.
I don't know if I can watch it though.
Exactly. Yeah.
Really?
Yes. Well, they made Caretaker black.
So I know what I'm doing tomorrow. Then I will binge Hellstrom. Octavia had watched the first episode. You should be watching. They should be watching. And I was like, yeah. And I'm tapping away. I'm working on my research, thesis. And I'm like, all right, I got this. And I'm like, yeah. Oh, that's Satana. That's not Satana. Right. So I wasn't really watching it. Okay, I'll watch it now.
But what I was going to say about this page, though, Chris, and I actually would like to know how you feel about it. But I felt like there was a vibe about it that felt very Darkhold-esque to me, just atmospherically.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, the shading on Louise's face and the glasses.
And I think that's what I was getting from this page that's up there.
Mm-hmm.
And it just felt very Darkhold, even though there's there's all the supernatural stuff, and there the demons and all that stuff, and quite frankly, there's quite a bit of storyline that they've put onto Hellstrom and Victoria. No, I can't remember now. Satana. So Anna, that is lifted directly from Ghost Rider. I mean,
for sure.
With Caretaker and the blood and trying to keep the two siblings apart.
I'll tell you why I posted this page though. I loved it's just two normal characters who are right. There's no Blade, there's no Ghost Rider. Even Blaze, who's Johnny Blaze he's no longer a Ghost Rider, but he's still involved. But there's just Hannibal King, and then Frank Drake, and then there's Louise Hastings, and there's these normal characters but they're not afraid, and they are just willing. And this is where Louise is like, I guess I know what I got to do, right? I feel like that's just it's such a powerful moment. Greg, you wrote this. Do you remember?
Yeah,
you wrote this.
But what's interesting, I don't remember how much stuff of the beats we all came up with. Because there was just moments that had to happen, and this was one of those moments that had to happen.
This was a quiet moment.
I honestly don't
loved
recall
this moment, Greg.
If I thought this up or if Chris thought this up, because when we were doing it, I would have to talk to Chris about, what would your character do? Especially this particular character. So I really don't recall which beats I thought up.
And I do feel that
somebody else may have thought up.
Each crossover, there was one or two characters in particular, like this character, Louise Hastings, really gets this, sets her fate. This sets her fate. The following sequel, the
Siege of Darkness, was it?
Thank you, Siege of Darkness. That Morbius gets just literally twisted, right? And I wondered who decides whose character. Okay, my character's up for grabs. Go ahead, mess them up. I mean, so like Christian, you knew this was going to happen to Louise, yes?
Mm-hmm.
It might have been Chris's idea, actually.
Okay.
I don't recall. I mean, I
mean,
know we had to resolve.
I know it
we had
wasn't
to
my
resolve
idea. Let's
somehow.
really fuck with her.
You know,
I also wonder, like, again, I was 10, 11. I wonder how teens or adults who are reading this, because you were, I mean, you know, I had an allowance. This is back in the 90s. I had allowance that was like $5-10. I wonder what, you had rabid fans of these books, right?
Rabid.
I'm imagining they were writing in, letting you know how they feel. They were fans of this. These crossovers kept happening. They're selling, yes?
Well, I mean, you know, our sales went down and down as time went on.
Okay.
That's why the books got canceled. They weren't, you know, selling like hot tickets at the end there.
Yeah.
You know, maybe by today's standards, they were still doing well, but by the standards back then, when X-Men was going gangbusters, you know,
Who colored that cover?
somebody at the Carnival of Death.
Wow, yeah, somebody that is. Well, that's what I was going to ask.
A lot of colors,
totally
man.
ruins that cover.
So,
that was not a Greg Wright cover, right? Because again, you really colored your stuff, and I'm like, ooh, oh.
It's really hard to.
That one wasn't mine, but you know,
not
everything
George.
I did was perfect. You know, but
wouldn't it have been George? Everything was George at that point.
Well, it could have been, but it depends. I colored a lot of covers in Bobby's office because she didn't like what George was doing. So, you know, but that's not one of them.
This cover segues me in though, because okay, so we're gonna go to Road to Vengeance. A lot happens here. Caretaker reveals he's a member of the Blood. It's a cult that battles the forces of evil. Through him, Blaze, Ghost Rider, and Vengeance learn that they receive their powers from a shattered medallion. The same piece of the medallion that Lilith and Centurius, a follower of Zarathos, is searching for. Howard, do you remember creating Lieutenant Michael Badaldino? I hope I said that right. Thank you. He became a Pound of Mephisto.
I just go ahead.
Nope. He was a souped-up version of Ghost Rider called Vengeance. What sparked the interest in creating a new Ghost Rider character who still had 1, 2, if you count Blaze, driving around? So why a third character, a Ghost Rider character?
Well, I mean, I was looking for an antagonist, and I don't know if there was this other character that came out of the Spider-Man office, Venom. This was really probably as close to my direct ripoff of Venom as you could get, which is, you know, to try to do a literal antithesis of the character. And it was honestly, Terry Cavanaugh and I did it again in that wonderfully critically acclaimed Clone Saga and the Spider-Man stories, where we created the character called Kane. But I
happen to love Kane, so
I do too, and apparently so does Marvel because they brought him back. But you know, Vengeance was to try. Well, I happen to have just finished a one-shot for Marvel featuring Vengeance that'll be coming out in December.
Nice.
And Javier Saltares has drawn it. It's a 25-page story. And as I said, I'll change my wording a little bit, but it's basically, I wanted to see, you know, what Ghost Rider would be like a Spirit of Vengeance if he wasn't such a wimp. And that's what Vengeance is. It's, you know, it is literally just all about vengeance without any of the shadow human nature elements holding back the Spirit of Vengeance. And
Howard, so my partner is like obsessed with, and I'm showing like one of his first. This is his first appearance. He's all into the speculation thing. I just read my comics. I'm going to open this up and read it again, and he'll kill me. So when you find out, or when you hear, like I'm telling you now, Vengeance is now a hot character. 2020, he's now a hot character. You're about to write a new series, or it's supposed to be
it's just a one shot at this point.
A one shot, okay. But now, so you know, his first appearance is now like Toby's like, don't open that. I'm gonna. This is going to be a hot book. Ooh, baby, you know?
Uh-huh.
How does that make you guys feel when you find out one of your issues? Like Darkhold's still a hot book because it's coming back. I keep thinking they just released the trade. Get ready, Christian, right? How do you guys feel? I mean, you know, Luke Cage had his own Netflix series, a great Netflix series. Marcus, you got a shout out to that. When you find out your books are hot, does that matter to you guys?
Somebody else not doing them.
Yeah, of course it does. I mean, you know, you're writing not for the audience, but you're writing to get readers. I mean, to get a sense that there's some, you know, even these conversations, Steve, you know, you're
a purist. I like the comic books.
No, you're appreciating
the movie.
The work that we've done, you know, is a different look at it than I've normally had, you know, even being at a convention and, you know, back in the day or whatever, you know, clearly, you know, you have a appreciation, which I appreciate. And I think probably all of us do, but, you know, you start to look at the work through your eyes and it had, you know, a different impression than I think I even had, like putting it out there. So, you know, the sense of not just popularity, but you write, especially when you're in the zone, to connect with somebody because you have a story that you're enthused about telling. And as a storyteller, you know, you want a reaction. So to me, that's the bigger charge than saying, oh, it's sold, you know, 150,000 copies, right? That's wonderful too. Maybe get a little money in the bank. But if you really are connecting with readers, that was always my best conversations at conventions or anything else, is where I would talk to people about what they got out of the story.
Yeah. At the end of the day, I mean, with some notable exceptions, as everybody knows, we create our own characters, but these characters are not our characters.
Right.
The stories are our stories, though. So,
yeah.
And that's the part that you look for reaction to.
Yeah. See, I always, I mean, while I was, you know, doing all these books, I didn't do a lot of appearances. I didn't do conventions. I wasn't getting that immediate feedback. I was kind of focused on the work, creating stories and characters that I enjoyed, and being a dad and a husband. And so I really didn't go out to do conventions. And then about 7 years ago, I got talked into doing one convention, tiny convention in San Antonio, Texas. And then that led to another one, and I, up until, you know, the zombie
apocalypse. You finally came to Boston like 2 years ago. It was wonderful.
Yes, yep. And but I did we meet there, by the way?
We met briefly. You had such a long line, and I didn't want to take your time, so I was like, you signed. I geeked out.
Yeah,
you know?
I
was one of those.
My point is, I've started to appreciate exactly what Dan said, and I mean, I think people think I'm being disingenuous about this, but I was genuinely surprised by it because it's not what I was doing it for. It was, to a certain extent, it was work and it was a paycheck, but I was getting to do this thing. I remember writing a story at one point that I started at about 10 o'clock in the morning, and I wrote straight through the day until my wife said, you know, you really got to eat at some point.
Oh, wow.
I stopped, and I remember picking up the phone, and I couldn't call the office because it was late enough that nobody was going to be there. And Mark DeMattis and I were very close at the time, and he lives nearby. So I called him, and I said, Mark, I was like, do you ever just love doing what we do? Where you and he just started laughing, and he said, oh, you had one of those days, huh? And it was that. So I was focused on the work, really. And now I am genuinely surprised. There are people that come up. I think I offhandedly referenced, there was a gentleman that came up to me at a show and started reciting dialogue from an issue of Spider-Man that I wrote. And I didn't recognize it because I don't read my own crap. And then he told me, and it was very it warmed my heart a little bit. And then I've had a lot of positive feedback to a series that I did called Mutant X, which really I just was kind of left alone to do that on my own back in the time, and I had a lot of fun, and I didn't really think about people reading it. And I get a lot of fans coming to me with those issues as well. So it's less about hearing about a thing being hot amongst collectors for me, you know, than it is with what Dan just described about having the people telling you, or yourself, you know, what you just said about how I gave you nightmares, apparently, because I killed a bunch of people in a carnival. Yes, but you know that
right.
Those moments are really cool.
Yeah, Stephen, I have to say that, you know, it's a thrill anytime someone tells you, you know, that they appreciate your work. Like Louise Hastings, I figured would be the least popular character. So to hear that she was your favorite thrills me. And the other thing is it's really exhilarating when one of your creations outlives your creation of it and goes on to appear in something else. Like when I found out Louise Hastings was featured in Hellstrom, like through the whole thing, I was like, wow, that's so cool.
You know, Victoria Montesi is still in continuity, right?
I didn't know that.
She was in, so Gary Conway wrote a Carnage series, a really well-written Carnage series just a couple of years ago. And he used her because she has ties to Cthon.
Interesting.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. All of you, everyone is like, you know, Marcus Luke Cage is like continued through. Dan's Daredevil. There are still ties to that. Greg's Morbius. There are still ties to that. All of you. Greg created a random character, Scorpina, who still appears regularly. So
Really?
yeah, no, all of you guys have still got, and I'm excited that Howard's writing. He's writing Vengeance again. I was like, it's a one shot. That's it. I'm happy for that. Right.
Yeah, and who knows? I mean, something more may happen if this one sells well. It was kind of fun to get back to the characters. I mean, I would have welcomed getting back on Ghost Rider at some point, just with the amount of time that has passed. I think I was done at the time, but you know,
yeah.
You
love it.
You go on. Although I really enjoyed the last Ghost Rider series that was Ed Brisson had written.
Agreed. I loved that book. I'm gonna get back to, because again so wait, before I go too far, we are getting comments. Howard, this is to you particularly, and I'm gonna butcher the name and I apologize. Timothy, is it Chismar? He says he knows you.
Oh, yeah, Chisma. I think
Chisma.
Yeah.
Chisma. He asked a really cool question. Was the Ghost Rider storyline supposed to be tied to the animated series? It's a random question, but it's kind of cool because there was a toy line of Ghost Rider.
Yes. I have some right here.
That's what I'm talking about. All right.
Whoops. Oh well. I just dropped Vengeance. But yes, there was a toy line. I have no recollection of it, of plans for it being tied to an animated series, but they would not necessarily have consulted with me. I mean, there are things that happen, like, I would have loved if somebody, when they did the Nick Cage movie, if somebody had reached out to me or Bobby or any number of people, because I think there was a lot of potential in that movie that quite frankly, it would have been just as good if they had reached out to somebody like Bobby, because it needed an editor. The story was there. It needed to be tightened.
Yes. So. Agreed. 100%. Okay. So Chris, you wrote a series of Vengeance stories that Marvel Comics presents. It seems your involvement was a natural progression from your time as an editor with the Spirits of Vengeance and Blaze books. But is there more to it than that? Were you able to accomplish what you hoped for, help me out, guys, Bad Bloodino? Did I say it right?
Badalino.
I don't know why I'm adding extra syllables. You wrote a lot of Vengeance.
I don't know that I set out with an arc in mind for Badalino. I was just having fun writing those. It was short form. You could do interesting things. I think I even brought Diabolique into it, who was one of my favorite creations.
From Darkhold.
Yeah, exactly. So I was just having fun, really. I can't say that I had some grand arc in mind.
Did you ask for the book, or they just kind of like, you know what, Chris, you know these characters, you do this?
How did it happen? I think it was, these characters, you do this. I think it was more like that.
There was a lot of that happened with us sometimes. They needed they needed product, and they would go to somebody that they knew could deliver. And because we were sometimes greedy, we'd say, yeah, okay, I'll do that, whether we had time or not. And then it's like Chris said, so you take the job, and whether you had a great idea or not, you would try to have as much fun with it as you could. And some of those stories were some of the most fun stories because, I didn't, if I didn't come in with some desire to do some, something deep and dark, I could just have fun. It was easy. It was fun.
Here's my next question. Chris, you were the editor of the Blaze series, which I enjoy. Partly due to Howard Rourke's inking over Ron Wagner. Now, Greg, you and I are going to talk about Ron Wagner in a moment, but I really liked Howard Rourke's inking over Ron Wagner, who, again, I feel is unsung in comic books. Where did you find Rourke? And I would ask, did you think that, I think this is, Octavia made me this drink, and it's really strong, and I apologize. Like, it hit me. It just hit me. Oh, wow, I can't read. Howard Rourke inked over Ron Wagner's work. Where did you find Ron Wagner? And the art of John Casley's colors were perfect for Howard's story. And I have to step back because I have to go help someone else. But I'm listening, guys. I'm right here.
No. The answer is going to be quick, which is that,
Okay.
Howard, what is your line? I do not recall.
That'll work.
I have no recollection.
I have no
Guys,
recollection of these.
I'm going to build a time machine, and I'm going to find you all because I love the Blaze. So Howard wrote the Blaze miniseries, and I loved it. Now, Howard, you were really horrible, really, really horrible to Johnny Blaze. And this is a character I somehow loved more. I loved Danny Ketch. My father, okay, let's rewind. Again, Octavia's drink hit me, and I apologize. My father, I loved Danny Ketch. My father loved Johnny Blaze. I loved Kyle Rayner, Green Lantern. My father loved Hal Jordan, right? You were really awful at Johnny Blaze. We found out in the Blaze miniseries, his wife actually worked for the Blood, correct?
Okay.
I mean, you were really horrible, Johnny Blaze. Chris, you don't remember anything about? Do you remember anything that went into the Blaze series? I'm giving you accolades right now because I love the book a lot. It was 4 issues.
I know it was 4 issues. I remember the logo. I remember the art was.
We find out that Roxanne is actually working for the enemy, and Blaze he's on a mission to find his children and his wife, and he can't believe that his wife has actually betrayed him. And
you always hurt the ones you love.
You do, right? Oof.
There comes drama.
Yeah, that's how you make stories interesting.
Yeah, if we had treated him, where his life was easy and kind and lovely, nobody would want to read it. So you need to throw those kinds of horrific things in there in order to make it work.
I loved the book so much, and I was just like, oh, he's so horrible. Maybe that's why I loved it so much, because you guys were so horrible.
We're a lot of
I mean, it's an old trope about like a romance. The romance is not about getting the characters together. It's about not getting them together.
Yep.
I just lost my.
The way you treat your kids and that, Mark, I really worry.
Yes, what doesn't kill them make them stronger.
Hey, Howard, this is a really good question. I have to, and again, I'm going to step out because I'm going to be right back. So I'm here, I'm listening.
Okay.
Danny Ketch's dad, we found out who his mother really was, but we never found out who his father really was. Do you remember what your plan was? Great question.
It is a great question. And I do not recall at the time. Yeah, there you go. I can think of a number of options that I might have had, but I do not recall specifically. At this point, this is going on, how many years ago was this? Was this going on, closing in on
95, 96?
No, well, no. I mean, when I started the series, it was when I wrote the proposal. It was 89. So yeah, so we're going way back. So I genuinely don't recall, and I'm not being evasive and saying that someday I'm going to reveal it, which I very well may. I just don't recall.
Goodness. Okay, so am I muted?
Now you're muted.
You're muted. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
There you go. You're back, but we
You're
can't
still
hear you.
muted. You're still muted.
Still muted.
You
There
know,
you go.
Oh, there you
Now
go.
you're
you can be
muted.
There you
better at
go.
this.
We're
I
back.
apologize.
We're
Again, strong drink. Wow, Tavi is a great bartender. All right. Thanks, guys, for your patience. All right, we're going to segue in to now, Christian. Okay,
Yes.
let me. I have been waiting for this moment for a long time
Okay.
because I feel like this is a series that has been all of them, but this particularly, all of them have been, but this particularly has been unsung. And over the summer, you made headlines. We're going to get there, right? And I'm like, I know who he is because I loved this book. And everyone's like, yeah. No. Like, this is a really important book. And no one listened to me. So now I get my 15 minutes to shower you with. I loved all these series, clearly, and I hope you guys understand. And I appreciate you all doing this for me because the 10-year-old inside of me is just screaming. But this book I did not want to like. I didn't expect to like. I take that back. I only bought it because it was tied into the Midnight Suns, right? And I fell in love with it, and I loved all your characters. It's sort of, tell me if I'm wrong, it's sort of like a Nightstalker book, like a Nightstalker book as far as the TV series, correct?
Yeah, it's I mean, again, because it's normal people. You know, the one unusual person is Vicky Montesi in that she has visions that leads them to the pages. But other than that, there's no superpowers, so they've got to think their way through things. So in that way, it's much more of a it's closer to a TV series where, you know, at least like Nightstalkers, where Darren McGavin, you know, didn't have any superpowers. He was just investigating and solving these or not solving these issues. So that was the idea behind Darkhold. In fact, Darkhold was not conceived as part of the Midnight Suns.
Okay, well, I was going to ask, so did you make the proposal or how did this come about?
I just wanted to write. And so I thought, well, they're not doing anything with horror. Let me see if I can come up with a horror comic. And as I said before, you know, I read that one line about some of the pages, you know, almost all the pages were recollected of the Darkhold. I'm like, that's my entry point. And so then I wrote the proposal for Darkhold with the twist in the proposal that Victoria Montesi is actually the daughter of Cthon.
So in the proposal, you wrote those three characters, Sam Buchanan, Victoria Montesi, and then Louise Hastings.
Louise Hastings. And then I also said that, and Modred the Mystic will be sort of like popping in and out and be the unofficial fourth member. And he, of course, is one who does have powers. But the three core characters have no powers. And that was written as a horror book. And when I put in the proposal to Bobby, it was right about the time that she was forming the Midnight Suns. And she said, hey, we're going to roll this into the Midnight Suns. And I was like, this is going to be the odd man out by far, because, you know, everybody else has powers. This is not that kind of book. But when someone says, we're rolling you into the launch of a family group of books that's, you know, with the biggest, hottest selling book in Marvel, you know, anchoring it, being Ghost Rider, you don't say no.
No, and again, props to Bobby Chase, because I possibly would not have picked up this book had it not been tied into. So again, we're giving snaps because, and of all the books, this possibly is my favorite. And it's interesting because I hadn't.
Nobody says that.
No, I know. And that makes me so angry. They're all such great books. And I really, again, and just talking to you guys, even more memories. I had reread these books before coming into this conversation with you. Coming with my 12 pages of notes, I had reread these series. And I was like, oh, yeah. And it all kind of comes back, right? These are the books I read over and over and over. And again, props to the artists, because their artwork is what really brought me back, right? Not only was the story, but it was the art. And I really enjoyed all these books, but this book particularly, I don't know. I just related the characters somehow, some way. I really, maybe because they were the normal guys and they were just stuck in this, and somehow, God, they're barely narrowly die. They're going to die from. Nope, they somehow survive, right?
Until they don't.
So how much planning goes into this, though? Did you know Sam was going to be? So Sam Buchanan is. Can you guys see my mouse? I don't know. Sam Buchanan is Montesi's bodyguard, but he's basically a double agent. Did you know that?
I don't think I knew it from the beginning.
Okay.
I think I got a little bit into it, and I thought, you know what? Let's flip this up a bit. And it was easy to make him a double agent because he doesn't realize who he's working as a double agent for.
He doesn't.
He thinks he's just doing his job.
Right.
And his job is to bring in these assholes who are, acting like they're solving the problem when they're actually the cause of the problem. And then he realizes, oh shit, I've been played. So that wasn't planned from the beginning, but as I've started writing, and I'm like, you know what, let's give a little twist here.
Now, of historical frame, Victoria Montesi was one of the first out gay characters in comic books. Now, you yourself are known as one of the first gay editors, writers of Marvel Comics.
Goddamn Kelly Corbasi beat me to the punch by I don't know, days, weeks, months. Otherwise, I would be the first.
Let's rewind, though. This is the 1990s. This is 92 when this book comes out. I mean, what was it like for you as a creator, right? Like, this is me as a gay guy, now in 2020, okay, whatever. But what is it like for you as a gay editor, gay writer, to create a character who's gay in 1990? Because I don't think you ever actually say she's gay.
The closest they would let me come is when somehow Jinx, who is Louise Hastings' grandson, finds out, and he goes, "Oh, you mean you're a duck?" And she grabs him by the collar, and he says, "Yikes!" And that's the closest I could come to because they were so gun shy after North Star coming out of the closet back then that they, you couldn't.
Because North Star had only come out as the first gay character, period, people, right? Just a few months earlier. Right. So for Victoria to be a lesbian, and again, lesbian's never written in the word. It's I think in the very beginning, from issue 1, you would insinuate. So she was a lesbian from the start, obviously, right?
Oh yeah, that's part of the reason why her father hates her.
Yes, and maybe that's why I love the book so much, because my father was a Baptist preacher, and I obviously was gay. I mean, I didn't know it at the time at 10, 11, but obviously my father knew that I wasn't normal, right? Again, figure quotes. So maybe I must have realized something in Victoria or whatever. But the book was well written to the point where it wasn't slapping your face, but it was there. And it was okay.
Well,
Victoria was totally cool. She's cool being who she is. It's everyone else who has the problem.
Yeah, no, she was written as someone who accepts herself. But she's constantly bearing the angst of the fact that her lover is, a paraplegic, quadriplegic, whatever we made her, because of her connection to the Darkhold. Yep. And so that torments her, and it becomes most explicit, their relationship, when she tries to fix that through a page of the Darkhold.
So in the first issue of Darkhold, so the entire world now knows you love birding, right? But even in the first issue, now having reread this, I'm like, oh, you've always loved birding. So in the first issue, you brought in your love of birding in Central Park.
The birds saved the goddamn day in the first issue.
They saved the day, right?
Yes. That was deliberate. And that's actually a riff on the legend, anyway, of the forming of Salt Lake City, that, their crops were being destroyed by locusts, and the thing that saved them was the gulls who came in and ate the locusts. So I was like, ooh, that's how we can solve this problem with the worms. And so, I have the birds come in. It's not a spell that brings them in, though. I forget I think she just gets them.
She realizes exactly, right? Yeah. Like she finally figures out, wait a minute, right?
But that's the fun of Darkhold, is they had to think their way out of these problems. Without powers, they had to think, okay, not that, characters that have powers don't also have to think their way out of problems, but it's more acute for them because they've got to be inventive.
Well, I guess my question is to all of you guys. So, like, Christian found a really cool way of pulling in one of his hobbies. How do you pull your other interests into writing, and how do they affect you as writers?
I think that's, when Howard said earlier on, like, you're right, none of us, to my knowledge, are actually vampires or, nanotechnicians or hold pages of, evil books, but maybe we do. But that's the thing, that's the pieces of business and moments that, you're able to bring in. I mean, my grandfather's name and his mafia background are in, stories and things like that. They're little reference points that sometimes they work, sometimes they don't, but I think you invest those parts of yourself, or they just become bits that are more real for you, and that allows you to add other integrity and reality to the story, because you've got a hook that you can attach yourself to, so with such validity.
What a great answer.
Yeah,
Refute that, Howard.
Down to earth, normal people. Again, I hate using the word normal, but every single one of you have found a different, twisted, underhanded way, depraved way to turn a story out. Where do you guys find that? You all seem so normal.
Because it's a lot more interesting. I have no interest in reading stories about boring people who do the right thing all the time. Characters who are morally compromised are much more interesting, and it's much more interesting to take your good character. I mean, I can think of nothing more horrible than somebody saying, write me a Superman story. I'm going to have to think of what can I do to fuck Superman up so bad just to make him somewhat interesting.
Zack Snyder, it's sort of like.
All right, he went like the other way, but that's the whole thing. You want, it's like, I think Howard said it. You hurt the ones you love. Because and it's like Marcus said. If you remember the show Moonlighting, the show died the second that Bruce Willis and Sybil Shepherd's characters got together, because that was not what the show was about. It was about them just not getting there, and you kept waiting for them to get together, and when they finally did, you went, oh, and then goodbye. But it's so much more fun to and I don't know, but for Dan and I were constantly trying to see what can we get away with.
Felt that way. Did you feel
You
that?
got a lot with, you got to
how nasty can I get? When will I get caught? And nobody ever stopped me.
But I think that was, but I'll disagree with that. In the sense that I always felt like we were doing things that were potentially true to the world, and where at least I knew I went off the rails was when I tried to incorporate things that weren't true to the world. If trying to bring too much deviant stuff into Daredevil didn't make sense, because that wasn't the world of it. But when you invested yourself in some of this, I actually think for me, where the Midnight Suns work doesn't hold up or didn't hold up as much goes back to something Howard said at the beginning, which is where it became too much about the pure play supernatural, right? The friction of the supernatural element with the real world is really interesting. Too much supernatural, you're in this like inside baseball world, and it becomes less of a point of entry for every other reader.
I like what you said, Dan. I actually think, I grew up very sheltered. My parents were, we were evangelical missionaries there. My parents were both hardcore Baptists. We traveled, and they're preaching their word over it. But I feel like comics were an outlet for me, for sure, and a view of the world that I knew existed that I didn't always, my parents were so careful about making me see this. And I knew there was more out there. I wasn't stupid. And I feel like these worlds that you guys let me see, and it sounds silly, it's a comic book, right? But no, really, even the X-Men obviously had a bigger message to it. And I feel like these stories did. Again, going back to Darkhold, she was totally comfortable. Victoria was totally comfortable being who she was. And I think that must have resonated with me years later, because once it came on, I was like, oh, this is who I am. Ding, right? I'm totally cool with it. And I appreciate that now, especially now, right?
Well, it's funny because what you talked about what Dan talked about, the supernatural world rubbing against the real world, that's sort of at the core of Darkhold, because it's always about the human flaw that the page goes after.
Yes.
And the people are always put in the situation where they've got it, like issue 12, where Modred gets offered his ultimate prize. He gets to have his soul back.
Yes.
And it's always going for that human flaw, what they're trying to make of themselves. I don't know. That's always
Christian. Let's talk about that, because
the other thing about other, that was a gift. When I read in the Darkhold lore that the way the Darkhold works is you use it and this thing called the other appears. And that to me was, this is what this book is about. It's about otherness. It's about the strange and the weird and how what it forces us to confront. And so, that's why the other is always there, even though, it's sort of that extra step in the whole Darkhold lore that makes it a little bit maybe cumbersome, that this other appears and you have to deal with the other before you get to the story. But to me, that was really important, because that otherness was just crucial in going to the heart of the human flaw. Anyway.
That's almost like another character, the otherness, correct?
Yeah, no, whenever I was writing about Cthon, I didn't want to make it, here's this demon called Cthon and he's a mean bad guy. No, there is no guy involved here. It is so beyond that. It is so strange. Sort of taking a more Lovecraftian approach.
Totally, 100%.
Yeah, that this is other. This is completely different, and it's gonna get you, and it's gonna go right for where your humanity is weakest.
Oh, I mean, it did. It pulled the bow and it went right to the heart. Every character and every supporting character or guest star, whoever that victim was, you found the core of. We got to talk about issue number 12. You've already
guys. I hate to say it, but I am going to have to exit. My dogs are chomping at the bit for me to take them out, and it's getting late into my day.
You're amazing for sticking around. Thank you, Howard.
So I think this has been fun, and I look forward to seeing you all in person soon. But I am going to have to take off. So,
thank you so much.
Well, thank you. I will talk to you soon, Christian, and I hope to talk to you all.
Thank you so much.
Good to see you. I will hunt you down one day.
I'm good. Thank you, Marcus, and I'll make sure Deb knows who you are.
Okay, good.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.
Again, thank you guys. We're like 11, and if you need to stop, we need to take a break, you let me know. But this is clearly, I'm like, I've been waiting for this since I was, 10. Issue number 12 was a big issue, and I posted this on Instagram, social media, like all over social media. People remember this story. Did you know Mordred was going to be part of the book? He was part of your proposal?
He was part of the proposal.
So was he going to become a redeemer? Because originally when I read it, I thought, I remember him from Avengers. Clearly he helped possess Scarlet Witch, blah, blah, blah. You brought that in, right? I love Wanda. Wanda's one of my favorite characters. And you brought her in, you did her justice. But you really, the poor guy, he gets a chance to have his soul back, and then you take it away.
He gets it back, and then he has to once again willingly give it away. And that was Cthon being like, I'm gonna.
What a bastard, right?
So deeply. But this is also a turning point issue for Mordred. At least that was the plan, and unfortunately I never got to write it. Because that last panel, there's a splash at the end where you see Modred's face, and half of it is like grinning maniacally, and the other half looks like it's about to weep. Yep. I think Rorik Tyler penciled this issue, and
great artist. Yes,
he did a beautiful job with that page in particular. And and I forget exactly how I phrased it, but if you look at what Mordred is thinking at that moment, he's saying something that sounds like he's committing to Cthon from now on. And what he's really vowing is, I will fix this no matter what I have to do. And
that's how I took it. He was like, I'm not done.
Yes. And
you won this round, but the war.
This is why Mordred takes on Jinx as his apprentice. It's part
right, and that's my next question. Exactly. He becomes almost like a father figure to Jinx, right?
Yeah. And his plan is, I'm going to teach this kid because I'm going to use him to fix this.
So Christian, let's rewind though. So Jinx is
Louise Hastings' grandson.
Thank you. Like, where did the idea of Jinx? I wanted to hate Jinx, and I don't know what it is about. Again, this is like 11, 13-year-old. No, so it's 93. I'm 11 years old. 11-year-old me is like, who is this punk kid? I don't know why, but I ended up loving him. Right. So where did he come from?
I don't know. Maybe an attempt to project. All these characters come from yourself to a greater or lesser extent. So maybe I was trying to project a youthful me into a modern context. I don't, I love the idea of Jinx, of this young, street kid, basically. Or maybe it's not a street kid, but he liked to affect.
A little bit though, right?
He liked to affect the airs of a street kid.
Exactly.
He was playing
that's perfect.
But that he had this potential in him. And where was that going to go? So that was fun to play with them, and Modred was eventually going to try to get Cthon back through Jinx.
But but Mordred wasn't necessarily. It wasn't altruistic. He was kind of using Jinx a little bit, right?
Yeah. Oh, for sure. But also, I mean, using Jinx to save the world.
Yeah.
Because what was going to happen, as you know, was Vicky gets pregnant. Right. And that's the Maliki prophecy, that the daughter becomes mother. She gets pregnant with Cthon. And so the solution was going to be, and Modred would have been powerless to stop it because he has committed himself to Cthon. He is Cthon's slave. So he was going to find a way to get Jinx to save the world from that. That was the plan. Never got to write it. Oh, well.
We're gonna get there though, but hold on. Do I have the next slide? Okay, I'm going too far ahead. And I just lost my train of thought. This is what happens when it's so late and it's a Friday night. Jinx, diversity. That's where I wanted to go. So you introduce a lesbian character. You've introduced not one but two characters of color. Well, we talked about this last session in August. You as a Black man, as a gay queer creator, what was your take on Marvel in the 90s in diversity? As a kid, I didn't realize it needed to be done, but I was happy to see characters of. I grew up in the city. I'm a white kid, but I have friends of color, right? I thought it was just natural, but I read some of the letter columns. Some people didn't necessarily take to it. What was your take?
Too bad.
Yeah, that was okay.
This is the world deal. As far as the environment, Marvel had no problem with Black characters that I could see, but the problem was the legacy. The legacy was you have this juggernaut with characters who are, blonde, superpowered people, from Captain America to Thor to Hank Pym, just blonde superpowers. And they are the characters who have been, going on forever. And so then you start adding Black characters, but they don't have the history of these other characters who everyone loves. So it's very hard to give them that same status and get them to that same point. So that's the problem on race to a large extent. The problem on gay was that they didn't want to touch it with a 10-foot pole. Because comics are still perceived in the States anyway as a juvenile medium, and people still to this day get really squeamish about the idea of gay people and kids. It's like, well, okay, get over it, because there are gay kids. I knew I was gay from the age of 5, and there are gay people.
Say it.
Yeah, so that's just the way it is. So, but Marvel had an issue, especially back then. They've come a long way. They were slow. DC was way ahead of Marvel in a lot of ways on this stuff. But
this is the thing I've thought about myself, just not to, I can't step on this for you, Chris, but
no, I'm done.
At Marvel, they never had a problem with writing people, white writers writing Black characters all over the place, writing Asian characters all over the place. It was not a big, in a positive way, but I feel like everyone was afraid to touch a gay character because for fear that it would come out like the Two Gun Kid, like it would come out like a caricature. It would not be, so it needed a writer that could come into it and write it with some authority and make it another person, another part of this person's personality without making it the single feature of their personality that you know about them.
But I mean, like Marcus, you took Cage and made him, so Luke Cage started as a blaxploitation character. You made it so he wasn't. Correct?
He was an isolated character. That's the part I got from it, you know, because I mean, he was a blaxploitation character. He was all about, you know, saying, you know, catchy phrases or whatever. And then the Luke Cage I grew up with was a Power Man Iron Fist. It was about a black character and a white character with a really powerful bond. They were friends. They loved each other, and they didn't care about the ethnicity was not a part of their friendship. It was something they acknowledged about each other, but it wasn't core to, you know, like, oh, I know I like you because you're black, I like you because you're white. It's like, I like you because of who you are. And that's the thing I liked about it, and that's the thing I tried to pick up on the series, was that without that, you know, he became a, you know, when you're a black character, I mean, that was a core part of it. I didn't understand why no one wanted to touch this. He was a black character whose best friend was white, and he was accused of killing that character, you know, of killing that person. That's horrible. that would the whole world look at you like, oh, you know, you did this. I knew it, you know.
Exactly.
And then touching the other part, which I loved, tried to touch, was, you know, the fact that when he came back, he didn't first go to his, you know, when Iron Fist came back, he didn't first go to Cage and say, sorry, I was, you know, in another dimension. He's like, oh, I was in another dimension, and then I was in my own comic with Submariner for 6 months. So now I'm coming back to say hi. It was like, you know, that was a bond that was broken. And I don't think, you know, and that became about the isolation of that character. But I don't even know why I said that. But
I agree. No, I'm glad you said it, because I agreed too as a reader. Yes.
But yeah, I think at Marvel, I think people were, I don't know, I would be afraid to write a character that was gay, and not, because you wouldn't want to write it and like say, this is the most important thing about this character. This is Mark, a part of this character. You
let Dan write a bisexual character in Epic Comics.
Oh, different.
Mark let me do a lot of things.
Yeah, we'll get there.
But you know, it goes back to.
But so I'm curious though. So Epic was very different than Marvel, right? So Christian, you like couldn't say lesbian in the word in text, right?
No, I could not.
No, I wrote a lot of characters that were, you know, not a lot. I wrote several characters that were bi, that were trans, that
were gay,
did, and I couldn't say that.
Sure did.
I just wrote them.
Right.
You know, and it would have been different because I wanted to I always felt Silver Sable was bi, and they would not let me do that at all. But they had no problem with my secret lesbian assassin squad, you know, that they didn't realize until like 6 months later when people pointed it out. And they're like, wait a minute.
Guys, we have to preface though.
I just didn't use the word lesbian.
It's like 90, 91. This is 93 that I have up on the screen, right? It's a different time. I get it, but this is all happening. This is reality, right? But again, it couldn't hit publication. I feel like, and again, I might not have students watching now because it's so late, but eventually they'll watch this. They have to understand it's okay for Mr. Hoover to be who he is now because of stories like this and because of guys like you who are able to just put out there like, hey, it's cool being you. You be you. But it wasn't always like that, right, Christian? I mean, like,
no, it was definitely not always like that.
Yeah.
This.
Well, it's still not like that. You know, I've got students that they're terrified of letting anybody know who they really are.
You're absolutely right.
You know, and it's sad because you can see them. They're struggling, you know, with themselves, and you know, they find I can talk to him.
Yep.
And that's
it. True.
Stephen.
You know, it's sad to watch anybody who can't just be themselves.
Stephen, I want to rewind a little bit and just tell you one story that you will appreciate, which is that I was in Greenwich Village in Washington Square Park, and there was a bunch of, I don't know what religious group they were, but they had bussed themselves in from Pennsylvania. They were in the conservative clothes and the wimples, and they were singing in a chorus hymns and psalms, and between the hymns, their leader would rail against homosexuality and the sins of the city and all this. And meanwhile, they had the kids who were not part of the chorus, these young kids walking around handing out little leaflets. And I was writing Darkhold at the time, and the new issue of Darkhold had just come out. And whenever the new issue came out, I would always go to a comic book store and buy it, just to buy it off the stands and look at it. And so I'm walking around with that, And this young girl, she couldn't have been more than like say 12, comes up to me and she goes, "Oh, here, take this," which is their literature. I said, "Oh, okay, well, I'll take that if you take this." And she said, "Okay." So she gave me the flyer and I gave her a copy of Darkhold. 0.5 seconds before her father came along and went whacked it out of her hands. The comic fell to the ground. He picked it up and he handed it back to me and he said, "We don't allow her to have things like that." And I said, "Oh, okay." And I walked away and I thought, he just made a comic book reader for life.
Totally. Let's go there because I think I told you guys over email. So I wasn't allowed to read Darkhold, and my parents are going to flip out if they ever watch this because eventually they will, right? I didn't read porn. I read comic books, okay? And Darkhold was a book I was not allowed to read, but because it was tied into the other Midnight Suns, I was reading it, obviously, right? And I was keeping it. And I loved this book, and it wasn't bad, right? There were literally real characters in this. This again was my soap opera. I was a cool kid. I don't think I wasn't depraved of anything. I think I was very well liked at school, but I loved comic books. And I was probably one of the only ones until, remember the trading cards? The trading cards like really became like the cool thing. And I was all of a sudden, I was like, cool. And I am the coolest teacher because I know all about Marvel Comics, but my parents would not let me read Darkhold. And I think it's because it was like Satan's work or whatever. Oh God, like again, having reread this, and I was so grateful that Marvel they collected an entire edition. I was so happy. I was like, this is so great because there are so many these characters are so good. All of it. I was so happy the Kate series was put into 2 volumes. I was like, these are good stories. Right. Okay. We're going back. I'm getting text and we're sidetracking. I apologize, but you guys are answering so many questions I've had. Number 2, Christian. So we talked about last time, Punisher was in everything. Even you have brought in the Punisher. Let's go back to 1990. Mm-hmm. Did you choose to use the Punisher? This is actually a very good story though.
I did choose to use the Punisher because again, the whole idea behind Darkhold was to go for that vulnerable character point for the character. And you've got all these great characters in Marvel, like the Punisher, who, his whole
he was in everything.
Yeah, he was in everything. So it would help boost sales, but there was also a natural reason to have it in it. If you have a Darkhold page that brings back the dead, gee, whose modus operandi is completely due to the fact that his family was killed before his eyes. The Punisher. So, that was sort of the genesis of that idea.
I mean, it was intense. I was just like, again, having reread them, like, oh yeah, wow, right? Let's talk about Victoria. Because God damn it, you put her through hell. So she wasn't, and I'm curious because there are some artists who, like, again, I was looking at the trading cards because I'm a nerd and I've got all the trading cards. She started off kind of a normal character. Again, I hate using the word normal. Right? She was like the girl next door almost, except knew karate and whose father, right? Like, okay. But eventually she sort of sexualized. Your story has never sexualized her though. No. Certain artists maybe would, but was your intention? We find out she's actually a daughter of Cthon. Mm-hmm. How far did you plan out? I have a couple of questions on her, but how far did you plan out on Victoria?
That was in the original proposal.
It was.
Yes, that she was the daughter of Cthon.
Because originally we thought she was like just invisible to like the pages or their offspring or whatever.
She's Cthon's daughter. She is the reason why all this stuff is happening.
And she's going to give birth to him. And I mean, how fucked up can you get? I mean, like you're on par with like Dan there, like damn.
Well, yeah, you gotta be mean to him or else, who's going to read it?
I mean, but so how did you feel about the series cancels? Like you don't get to tell that story. No. Eventually the story comes out in Doctor Strange. J.M. DeMatteis wrote it. It's a great story. I love DeMatteis's writing. He's a prolific writer, deserves every kind of accolade you can give him, but I was disappointed you didn't get to write the story.
Well, me too. But, I'm glad the story got wrapped up in some fashion. I was going to actually have them all blown up by a gamma bomb. So that was going to be my solution.
I was right. That would have been great, right?
Because they get a gamma bomb in the second issue. That was part of the plan. they would take that gamma bomb and they would before Vicky could give birth, and my idea was that Lilith would be there midwifing the birth of Cthon.
Oh, that would have been great.
And Vicky's like, someone put a stop to this, and they set off the gamma bomb to stop it.
I mean, really though, and Howard's not here, but he really put his characters through hell. You really put your characters even through the short run.
All did. You have to. That's what makes stories interesting.
I mean, the poor woman, right? I have a question. So, do you notice, like on the screen, I have like her tattoo in the hair, and then Louise.
What tattoo in the hair?
Do you remember like the bones? The who came up with that? Was that you?
I don't remember it. I never put a tattoo in Vicky's hair.
No. So when she remember she used a page of the Darkhold, right?
Yeah, when she was trying to cure Nash. Sorry?
So afterwards she uses it. She somehow survives this ordeal. There's like this tattoo or like hair coloring of like a bone hand. Do you see that in her hair?
It's kind of there.
Oh yeah, look at that.
Do you see that, guys?
Yeah.
I'm not imagining that happens.
You could see it clearer in that first panel.
Yeah. That's not me. That's somebody else who did that.
It came after. So this cover here. Okay, now look at this cover. This evil incarnate. Remember, she had been using it. She was trying to save Nash, right?
Right.
Now look at the cover here. This is where the tattoo or whatever you're gonna call it, the hair coloring. It's like a white streak, but it looks like a hand shows up in her hair.
Sorry, I got to collapse my screen here because I'm not
sorry,
seeing.
guys.
Oh, is that what? Interesting.
You don't know this.
No, I don't know this.
Christian, you're failing me. You're failing me because
I never wrote this.
I want to know the story.
It's possible that Rorik Tyler put that in without me ever noticing. I never wrote it, but it's interesting. Comics are a collaborative effort. This is how things happen.
Okay. So also Victoria Montesi, Louise Hastings, she had tattoos that were like etched out, like runes or something etched out over her head. Do you remember?
No, she had a headband that she wore.
Are you sure it was a headband?
Yeah, it was a headband.
Do you know anything about this book, Chris? Anything at all?
Did he write this? Did I get the wrong Christian? Who's this poser? I'm gonna make scans because
Well, anyway,
So I wondered if it was artistic license, if it was a headband, but I swear eventually there was no like line. Again, my background of art, I noticed detail. I was like, what is that?
I'm glad you pointed out the hand to me. I never saw that before.
You never noticed that. That drives me crazy.
Well, the funny thing is, a lot of times you write a comic and all you see it in black and white, and then you don't see the color until it gets in print, and you may not really have noticed it.
And I wondered how much.
It's funny the things I don't notice that you'll point stuff out and think, I wonder where that came from. And it could have been an editor changed something, or when it was in black and white, it didn't occur to me that was going to stand out, and the colorist decided, this thing that's really not actual bones, it's just this weird lighting on her hair, but they left it white, so now it's bones. You never know. I mean, there's, it's not a perfect thing to create comics, especially back then, because everything moved so fast. So errors occurred, and then people thought that was part of the story.
I don't like that. I want to know. I'm gonna let it go. I'm gonna let it go. All right.
You're not gonna let it go.
In my Christmas card, Kristen, you're good again. So really, what's the story? Like, I'm moving on.
Okay.
Because we have viewers who are watching, and I apologize because I take over.
By the way, is anyone else like losing steam here? Because I'm like, yeah. So
yeah.
We should probably wrap up in a defined time period.
Okay, that's true. That's totally true. So let's move on to Morbius, Greg.
Okay.
You ready?
Oh yeah.
So guys, Len wrote me, and to our viewers, we reached out to him. He's not doing hot. He's struggling with his health. So we had hoped he'd be part of this, but so here's what I wrote. To our viewers, we extended an invite to Len, but he's currently struggling with a long list of problems. All of us tonight wish him best, but Len provided this statement. You guys ready?
Yeah.
He goes, so this is after I had sent out questions to all of you, so you would preview my questions. And he wrote, one thing I want to correct. I wasn't brought in, and he used quotes, to write Morbius. I had been working on a pitch that provided him with a viable, that provided him, I don't know who the him is.
Morbius, probably.
Morbius.
Okay. With a viable continuing premise for 2 to 3 years before Chase, that's Bobby Chase, got the memo to start looking. He wrote, Howard Mackie, who I was working with as an assistant editor at the time, knew about it, and having been in Bobby's office when the mandate was delivered, Howard found excuse to amble out of her office and back to ours, proceeded to share the intel, and suggested I produced a finished pitch with all possible speed. So I took the latest drafts, of which there were many, but this was fresh and ready, and out of one of my many desk drawers, and wandered over to Bobby's office to deliver it. The whole misbegotten Midnight Suns and its perpetual state of crossover. ...
It's so Len.
Later. Morbius sticks out all of that as a severed limb. What happened is like this, or if foresaw as a solo series that resolved around the main character. What happened is like Trump getting elected. None of us foresaw the fates that awaited us. Well, okay. If you look inside the back cover of the Rise of Midnight Suns trade paperback and read the last sentence of the text there, you may feel a momentary shiver, but I swear I didn't mean it as a prophecy.
Is it? Do you have to read the last line backwards?
I don't know, right?
I'll read it for you.
I don't know if we're going to be able to top that. That might be the cutting off.
That was profound,
Yeah.
right? I was like, oh, wow.
You have it? What is the last line?
It says, this whole thing, this is Len Kaminsky. This whole thing has been way too easy and way too much fun. I'm sure we'll all be punished for it.
Ouch.
Wow.
That's a burn.
Wouch.
Greg, you began as a colorist for the book, but became a writer when Len left shortly after within the first year. You left before the end of its second. Why did the series go through so many creators so quickly?
It's like, Len created a book that did not really fit into the Midnight Suns to start with. He's not a supernatural character. He's a scientist who was dying of like a cancer-like disease. He tried to cure himself and fucked up and turned himself into a science-induced vampire who has to suck blood or he goes crazy. So Len came up with a premise that, they yanked it into, this more supernatural world, and he tried to make it fit. The problem that he had was artist Ron Wagner hated every single thing that Len was doing, especially any scenes in laboratories or people talking or anything that involved Morbius not flying down and just killing people and stuff.
Knowing that Morbius was a character who was a scientist.
I don't know, but Ron he hated it, and he made it very known to everybody how much he hated it. And I guess Bobby didn't quite understand what Len was trying to do either. And it all came to a head with this issue that Len had written with that was crossing over with Doctor Strange, which coincidentally Len was also writing. And she'd had enough and she wanted to get rid of it. And I happened to be in the audience, and Ron and I had been talking about what I would do if I was writing the book. And Ron was like, that's what I want. That's what I want. So Bobby said, I don't know what to do. Who can I get? And I went, oh, I'll write it. And she goes, okay. What would you do? And I told her what I would do. And we came up with all this stuff. She said, okay, well, I need you to rewrite this crossover right now. So then I got to call Len up because Len's writing the second part.
Wow.
And I thought, oh my God, this is going to be this horrifying conversation with this guy that has just been, tossed off the book. But he couldn't have been nicer, because I always got along well with Len, and he told me what he was doing in the book. And he said, yeah, just do whatever you want as long as you do this, this, and this. And okay. So I rewrote the story to, the way that Ron wanted it to be done. did the parts that needed to coincide with what Len was planning on doing in Doctor Strange. Then I get this phone call from Roy Thomas. And he's talking to me about Doctor Strange. And I'm like, what the fuck do you want? And he goes, well, I'm writing this crossover here with Morbius and Doctor Strange. And, Len Kaminsky was on the book and they fired him and brought me back. And I'm like, what in the hell is going on? How does somebody get tossed off of 2 books on a crossover literally the same month?
Yeah.
And I was like, look, I wrote my part that was supposed to dovetail with what Len was planning. I said, take it, talk to Bobby, talk to the editor. I don't give a fuck what you do. And I said, it's like, I didn't want to write this stupid crossover thing anyway. I tried to do the best I could for Len's sake. And then Len's off the book. And then within, I don't know, was it 4 or 5 issues?
Yeah.
Ron Wagner quits the book anyway.
Exactly.
So, yeah, I don't know what, is up to him. The only thing I can say is immediately on taking on the book, I had to rewrite his story. Then they asked me to do the crossover with Dan with Nightstalkers, which was fun. Then we had this big conference where we came up with one giant crossover that was a nightmare, followed by another one that was a nightmare. So I barely got to write any of the stories that I had actually described to Bobby originally that I wanted to write. So by after a year, I just said, I spent a year writing a book that I didn't intend to write at all. I mean, it happens sometimes because it was, and we were being told by people above Bobby, make it more like the X-Men. Does he have to bite people? Does he have to suck blood? Maybe he doesn't have to kill people. It was just like one thing after another. We kept trying different things to sort of satisfy the people that were, on her back. And I didn't even know who the guy was at the end, because originally we wanted to turn him into this we wanted to make a tragic romance out of the book. And if you read what I wrote, you'd be like, you wanted to write what? Our intent was to bring Martine back and break his heart, which I did get there. We're gonna get there. And then the Lilin Blood, we were trying to make him more superhero-y, and that wasn't working. And then having so many different artists jumping on the book. And I liked working with all of them, but it was crazy. It's like I didn't know which end was up, so it's funny when I look at someone and I go, wow, I don't remember this part at all.
Greg, you hit every point I wanted to ask. I mean, you went through so many artists, and it felt like the book was like, okay, so Glenn took it, and then you kind of went this way, and I like your direction. I did. And then all of a sudden, again, crossovers hit, so you're like, oh, we're back to where you want to go. Okay. And then another artist comes over. It felt like it was just so confusing.
Well, it was all over the place, which is probably why I took this character Slaughter that Len had created.
Yes.
And I decided to make him the most twisted motherfucker I could.
You sure did.
Because, Morbius is, I don't know how you defeat the Morbius. So I had to give him somebody that he couldn't kill. He couldn't hurt him. And I just, it's like, I think that was probably my frustration. And, and I had a great time with Slaughter. I would just mangle him and bangle him, and he just snap himself back together.
Coming back, right?
And he's constantly coming back. But yeah, it was one of those, I was, because I didn't know what to write, because we were trying to please Ron, and then he leaves.
Did you have to keep Morbius tethered to the supernatural? Because he becomes a Midnight Sun. So Len had said he was not supposed to be supernatural. He
wasn't.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was the thing. They wanted, again, we were doing all these crossovers. That, so you had to, figure it out. It was one of those things where it's like, I kind of got onto this roller coaster and didn't quite know how to get off,
right,
or guide it in a direction that I really wanted to. It was strange. It was fun. Morbius is a fun character. It was fun to, play with all the other characters. I enjoyed the art. I enjoyed coloring the book. But, it was, I did. By the end of the year, I had felt lost. And I had said to Bobby when I left, I said, do you like any of these stories? And she goes, I don't even know.
Wow.
And I said, so I kind of left before, I just had nothing left.
Again, so we all know, and anyone who's followed me, and because we just talked about it in August, but I loved the character Deathlock, partly because of your stories, right? You tied into Morbius and Deathlock in a really cool way. Do you remember how that came about?
Again, it's a crass thing to say, but it's like when we were talking with Marcus and Dan, we had our own little universe of characters that
Yeah.
we could use, and we were always being encouraged to bring other characters in. So you'd bring in, characters that you liked, you just bring them in, and I could use them and do with them as I wanted. And you try to think, okay, what can I do that's interesting between these two characters? You try to find, something, because there were times when I was told you have to put this character into this story, and that character did not belong in a story at all, and you'd have to say, okay, what connection can I make so that at least their interaction will be interesting for me to write, and hopefully the readers will like it, because I can't have Deathlock kill Morbius. It's like Morbius and Ghost Rider. There's no reason Ghost Rider shouldn't have taken Morbius out a billion times, but you have to come up with some cockamamie reason why. Okay, I'm going to leave you again. I believe that you won't kill again.
But Greg, I feel like, again, one of the reasons I want to do this with you in particular is because, yes, you're known as a colorist, and again, we're going to do a panel of you and colorists. I really want to talk about that. But you as a writer really found amazing character moments between characters like Morbius and Deathlock, Morbius and Ghost Rider. It wasn't like it was just like dropped in, like, okay, there's a misunderstanding, let's battle. No, you found like really cool character moments. You found a connection, a scientific connection between Deathlock and Morbius. I thought that was really cool.
Well, the thing is, we've all read so many and mocked so many things that are just that suck. So,
Yes.
And especially, this is a group that, if we do something stupid, we're likely to tell each other, in not the kindest tone sometimes. So that's, we have your little audience of professionals that you don't want to be mocked by. So you have to make sure you do a good job. It's sort of like, when I decided, okay, I'm going to write some gay characters, I have a lot of gay friends. And I was like, the last thing I want is for them to read it and say, boy, did you get this wrong? What are you doing?
Right.
So, you have to do your research. You have to do your homework. You have to think, okay, how do I do this in such a way that it's interesting? Really, I mean, you want to have an effect on the reader, and, it was interesting. Sometimes you get mail and they thought I was doing something that I wasn't. But the fact that they were giving it some thought was great. Because when you get letters, oh, this is awesome. I love Morbius just kicked ass. Yeah, I don't care. That's really the artist made it look cool like that. That's not my part.
And I said it before, but I love the letter page because the letter page is like a time capsule of that era, and who's reading what and what they expect. Right? They expect Morbius to kick ass and slaughter and blah blah. Morbius wasn't necessarily, I guess he was a murderer, but he wasn't like going out after, right?
That doesn't make him a bad person, really.
I mean,
Murderer.
he was going out.
Come on, let's be fair.
It's like the Punisher. The Punisher's a serial killer.
Totally.
And that's that because Len had said to me, he goes, Morbius is basically the vampire Punisher.
But they were all bad.
Very bad people.
But that's exactly that's funny. But that's the whole thing. It's why does Ghost Rider let him live? Because he's only going to kill those who deserve it. Okay.
Only
I don't need him to say that. It's not.
But Greg, Greg, you're writing Morbius, you're coloring Ghost Rider and other stuff. You're also editing other books. You're writing Deathlock.
He is the linchpin.
He is the linchpin.
I'm sorry. What was the question? I got.
No. All of you guys, Christian, you are writing, you're editing. Marcus, you're editing, you're writing. Dan, you're writing a couple of books, right? Like, what is it like to multitask like that in the 90s?
Marcus was an artist as well.
That's correct. Thank you.
Yeah.
And a colorist. So he'd done. So.
Thank you. And right now,
we got paid so little that if you weren't writing, you were starving. So it was a great way to supplement the income. But I mean, like I said, in my case, I can only speak for myself. Writing was my main interest. So, editing was fun. I mean, I loved Marvel in the 90s was just a fun place to be.
Was it?
It was. It was fun.
All still bear the scars. And when I say the scars, I mean this feeling of having gone through this thing with these other people that bonds you together, and we loved it, and it was fun. I still look back on it, and it's the best job I ever had. So, you know, but that, you know, for me, it was the editing was a means to eventually do writing. So, you know,
when you're editing or assistant editing or whatever, you're watching other people do all this work, and you very quickly go, I can do that. I want to do that. And even when you write that first story, which is, you know, usually not this great story, the second you get art that somebody spent time drawing this story,
and brings your story to life,
you turn into this little kid, and that's not a feeling that ever goes away, because it's amazing to see somebody visualize something that you had thought of. You know, sometimes it's frustrating because what they did is not what you want, but so many times what they did, it's just so cool. I can't imagine how much fun you must have had with Richard Case. You know, he's so great.
No, beautiful character creation from Richard. You know, what he did with Louise Hastings, all that was him, with the dreadlocks and the headband. That was all Richard Case. So yeah, no, I remember when I first got the logo, just the logo for Darkhold, and I was like, oh
yeah, that's
my
a great
God,
logo.
That's becoming real. You know, it's and
no, but it's cool because you actually created that book. You know, I remember.
I probably still have a copy of your proposal somewhere. I remember I was one of the people that read, like, they had like, here's a pile of proposals. We're like, these are all new stories that have been solicited from people, like new ideas that are not like another character that already exists that we're pitching, but new concepts. And
guys, in
Darkhold
the
was one of
90s, what was proposals like? So Mark, that's a great question. Like, what were proposals like in the 90s? Were they just like coming out like water, or?
Well,
they
came out like water, but most of them sucked.
Yeah.
There were 2 Wang computers at the office.
And the Wang! I remember the Wang!
And I remember I stayed late on nights writing away on the Wang to make my proposal. So, you know, it's you know, you list the premise, you list the characters and what their core thing is. You do a couple of plot synopses of sample issues. You know, and it's what you'd expect. You know, it's an outline of what you plan to do. So, is it a good idea? What's interesting
is everybody here that got a proposal through because there was something about it that was very different from something standard. You know, and that was the thing, because I did a few really standard, terrible proposals. You know, and I can look back now and go, yes, no wonder nobody wanted those. Those were terrible. But, you know, the ones that really have stood out, you know, the things that made it actually a new, different version of what was going on, you know, and I think that's kind of what happened. You know, Len's proposal for Morbius was very different. You know, Dan's version of Nightstalkers was very different. Marcus's Cage was very different. Terror, you know, nobody had ever heard any, you know, I mean, I can't even imagine what people thought of that when they decided to do that.
I still don't understand.
The Darkhold. I mean, I had never even heard of the Darkhold, and all of a sudden it's like, what is all this cool stuff? You know, and I think that was a big deal because it was actually kind of fresh.
All right, guys, we're moving on because ton of questions, and I don't want to waste all your time, but
yeah, I'm really starting to flag. I apologize.
I'm moving. I'm getting there. And if you need to take a break, and if we have to reschedule, I understand, Dan.
I think I mean I wanted, you know, I'd love to get to the Barker stuff and that kind of thing, but I'm really.
It seems like it needs to be about the
I'm
midnight.
hitting the wall here.
Okay.
Happen before the midnight, before the Barker stuff. I don't think we can get to that.
Yeah, I think we'll have to do the Barker stuff another night.
So okay, we'll reschedule. So we're going to wrap up Siege of Darkness, but I got to tell you a really quick story. I want everyone to know, and I want everyone watching to know, that Gregory Wright taught me how to use Tum.
What?
Yeah.
How to use what?
Gregory Wright taught me how to use Tum. I was 11 years old. All right. And this panel, penciled by Ron Wagner. Okay. I cannot believe this got away with it, that you guys were totally cool with it. But I didn't know at 11 years old, you use tongue to kiss.
That was totally Ron.
And
I mean, I wrote the scene, but yes, that was Ron. And,
so
and
Greg, you talked about how you were going to make this a how did you put it? A romance title? Not quite, but
yeah. Well, we wanted to make it a tragic romance, but we wanted it to be fairly sexually charged. you know, and that's what, you know, Ron was really into that. And I said, yeah, go for it. And, you know, maybe they'll make us change something. And they didn't make us change that particular panel, but
I
yeah,
mean,
we got
I was
trouble
like,
for that.
what's this? I don't know. And I remember at 11 years, like, okay, I like it. I was impressed. All right, so we're gonna move fast because I don't want to take you guys. Howard's not here, but he wrote a really great Morbius tale, and I'm sure viewers are watching. They love this. Chris, you and Greg wrote some really cool Werewolf by Night stories. Why wasn't Werewolf by Night part of the Midnight Suns? You guys wrote some really good stuff. You brought him into Morbius, Greg, and Chris, you wrote him in Marvel Comics Presents.
I don't know if there's a good answer to that. I think maybe,
You know, because they didn't think it would sell.
or
that's
no
all.
one came up with an interesting proposal.
Yeah, I never did. I think Len might have done a proposal with him at some point as well.
It's likely.
Maybe.
Based on what you guys wrote.
But yeah, most of it is either nobody, like Chris said, either it's nobody came up with a proposal or they just didn't think it was going to sell, you know?
No, based on what you guys wrote, it was awesome. So I don't want to take too much time, but okay, there became a hierarchy of like characters. So help me out here. Make sure this is like correct. There's Chthon, yes, at the top. Then Zarathos, equaled with or on parallel with Mephisto. Then maybe Lilith, then Salome, then maybe Nightmare, or maybe Nightmare is on par with Mephisto and Zarathos. And then maybe Varney, who was like the first vampire, and then possibly Dracula's at the end. Do you guys agree or disagree with this table?
To me, it's like, who's stronger, Thor or Hulk?
Yeah,
like,
okay.
Yeah.
Well, Chris, you can't put a question out there like that and not answer it. Who is? You know.
The answer to that question is always, whose book is it?
Yeah, exactly. Because in my book, Chthon rules, but you know.
Well, he's got the top spot, so you should be happy.
There you go.
But isn't Chthon kind of like the Cthulhu of Marvel?
Yes.
Okay.
Even though they draw him there with this like stupid guy in a hood, which is, you know.
That's like the 70s movie version of Cthulhu.
It so is.
Like, you don't have special effects, and you know, you just throw it in there.
Yeah, this is not something I really gave any. You know, Grunwald would love this.
Yeah.
Grunwald will be moving this around.
He'd be all over. This would be a new book series for him.
All right, guys. Do you want to take a break? Do you want to stop and we'll reschedule?
Yeah, we're gonna have to. I'll myself. I'd love to do it again, Steve. I'd love to talk Barker. It would be a lot of fun, but I think this is more than a break right now. I gotta.
It is. I'm looking. It's 11 o'clock, and our readers are like, "Oh my god, are they going to keep going?"
If they want to keep going, it's not going to be with us. I don't think.
Yeah. I'm cooked.
Maybe Chthon might want to continue. I don't know. But, you know.
Okay. No, I totally appreciate it. So we'll reschedule and we'll
because I talk about birds.
I forgot how much I enjoyed the Clive Barker Start of the Universe, but I'm glad we were able to do this. Thank you guys.
Cool.
Well, thank you, Steve. This is a lot of fun.
So they released all of the Darkhold in a trade paperback?
Yeah, and even the side stories that were in Midnight Suns Unlimited, which I read those again for the first time today, and I was like, shit, I forgot that Joe Quesada and Jimmy Palmiotti did the art on this one. Chiaroscuro, the art is just beautiful.
Oh, that's very cool.
Yeah, anyway.
Hey.
Anyway, guys, it was great to see you again.
No, we haven't seen you.
Before we go there,
I don't know when the last time I
feel
saw
you
you
have-
was. Maybe at the
so-
reunion.
And I do, Mark. I pulled you in, and we're gonna get there because I do. I feel like Mark is like.
You know, Dan could talk to you probably more about. I'm pointing down because that's where he's on my screen.
Yeah.
Can talk to you more about the Barker version.
Dan's there. Oh,
Whatever.
Steve is there.
Yeah, it's really good seeing all you guys again. Especially,
We have to get back because I want to talk about the Clive Barker stuff, but as far as Midnight Suns, do you guys feel like there's a legacy you would hope? Dan, do you hope there's a legacy of your stories? Christian, do you feel like there's your hope for if there were a legacy or if there were a memory of your stories? Greg, same for you from Morbius. What do you hope they'd be?
I think you're pointing, you made it clear there's a legacy. It's affected, you, and if it's affected you, it means it's affected other readers, in the same way in one form or another. I don't know that it's the Midnight Suns in the sense of like, oh my gosh, are a lot of people sitting around talking about this or a revival of that sub-universe, but more that we were able to strike a good balance between us as creators and friends and work in a shared environment that we got charged up about because we liked horror, because we liked, the humanity. We liked these different parts. And for a moment in time, we were able to capture a little lightning in a bottle before it got perhaps, laborious in the sense of, oh my gosh, you got to do this big crossover, you got to do this event. I remember that first thing again as pure play. We're having a hell of a lot of fun. And I think that came across as, I don't want to undermine it, but just really good stories.
I can't say it better than Dan.
I just hope everybody had as much fun reading stuff as we had putting it together. I mean, we complain about stuff, but we had a blast. I just hope the readers, when they read it, they enjoyed it.
Personally, I did. And everything you guys have said,
especially with tongue, that's gonna be my
thinking.
That's my legacy.
I think I learned about tongue from you too.
We're done. I'm
anyway, on that.
I don't think you guys are the only ones in the 90s who said that. That's what Greg taught them.
I mean, like, I can't thank you all enough because the little kid in me, this is a moment I've lived for forever. I'm crying, right? But I'm trying to hold back the tears because you guys were friends in my head. I really grew up with you guys. Again, I was okay. It was not I was a nerd. All right. But I got out. I had fun, but I loved your stories and you guys really impacted somehow who I am today as a human being, as a educator, as Steve, right? And I can't thank you guys all enough. All of you, from Luke Cage to Morbius to Silver Sable to Darkhold to Daredevil to Shield to Nightstalkers to Ghost Rider. Howard's not here, but all of you guys impacted me in some way. And I'm very cool who I am, and I'm grateful for that. And I know I'm impacting, and I'm a role model for my students. And I appreciate all of you. You guys wrote some great stories, and I think like you said, Dan, lightning in a bottle, right? It really was.
Thanks, Steve, for that. That's really wonderful to hear.
It really was, and I appreciate all of it. I'm going to email you now, and we're going to reschedule because people are expecting the Clive Barker stuff, and I've got pages.
Nothing says Christmas like Clive Barker. So,
Cubes under the tree, anyone?
Right.
Nice little box under the tree, yeah.
Exactly.
I'm ready. Now I'm ready. I've got my question. I was so worried about the deadline. Mark, what do you got?
You see my background?
I do. We love your background. Is that Jorge?
I see it. Oh, I can't show you.
Because
I have that piece of art. My background.
Mark, that's from your story.
Is that?
Yeah.
That's from your story.
That's my story.
All right, guys, I gotta go.
Yeah, really, guys.
Love you.
Good night.
Take care.
Chris, I hope we see you soon.
Yes, all of us.
Chris, I sent you a Facebook message.
Oh, I will look for it.
Cool.
Marcus, we got to talk about that story.
Yes, I love this story.
Because I love this story too. I remember this when I was a kid, and now as an adult, I'm like, now I get it. Right? Cool. All right, we're gonna reschedule. I'm gonna email you guys now. Thank you guys both.
Thank you. It was really fun.
Take care. Marcus, see you later.
Good night, guys.